I recently downloaded Tinder to meet people. It sounds like a confession, doesn't it? Like admitting a weakness. In the age of hyperconnectivity, loneliness is a shame we keep as a dirty secret. We all have hundreds of friends on social media. We keep up with everyone else's perfect lives, with their Sunday brunches and trips to Bali. But at the end of the day, when you turn off your laptop screen after 8 hours of work and the silence of your apartment in Austin becomes so thick you can almost touch it, the need for real contact, for a voice other than that of a podcast host or your mother calling from Portland to ask when you're going to settle down, becomes unbearable. My name is Kiara Chen, and I'm 29 years old. I've been living in Austin for 3 years after moving from Portland, Oregon, where I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood with identical houses and perfectly manicured lawns. I came to Texas looking for opportunities, looking to reinvent myself, looking for that indefinable something that all 20-somethings look for when we leave our hometowns. I work as a freelance writer, mainly writing content for corporate blogs and tech company websites. It's a lonely job, but it pays well and allows me to work from home in my one-bedroom apartment on the east side, where I can listen to loud music and work in my pajamas if I want to. My apartment is on the second floor of a complex that was once a converted warehouse, with large industrial windows and high ceilings with exposed beams. I decorated it with plants that I bought with the hope of caring for them, but that mostly survive by miracle. Posters of indie films I saw at the South by Southwest Festival, and a growing collection of books that I buy at Book People but rarely finish reading. It's a nice space, the kind of place I photograph for Instagram and get lots of likes for, but it feels empty most nights. I have a best friend, Lena Rodriguez, whom I met at a creative writing workshop when I first arrived in Austin. She's a graphic designer, 10 years older than me, divorced, with 2 cats, and a no-nonsense attitude that I sometimes need. We meet for dinner once a week, alternating between her apartment on South Congress and mine, drinking cheap wine, and complaining about our impossible clients and the difficulty of meeting decent people in a city where everyone seems to be just passing through. It was Lena who suggested Tinder. "Kiara, you haven't dated anyone in 3 months," she said one night as we shared a bottle of Malbec on her couch. "And no, that guy at work who emailed you about a project doesn't count as flirting." "I'm not looking for anything serious," I replied, although the truth was more complicated. I had been in a serious relationship in Portland with a guy named Derek, who worked at a startup, and left me saying he needed to find himself, which I later discovered meant he had found a yoga girl named Ashley. Since then, I had had a couple of failed attempts at relationships that never lasted more than 3 months. Well, that's why you should download Tinder. It's not just for finding the love of your life. It's for meeting people, going out, remembering that you're an attractive 29-year-old woman in a city full of interesting people. I wasn't looking for eternal love. I clarify this because it's important to understand my mindset at the time. I was looking for companionship, someone to have a glass of wine with, laugh about silly things with, exchange the warmth of another skin against mine on those nights when the air conditioning makes the apartment feel like a cold cave. Something simple, transitory, human. My job allowed me that flexibility in my schedule, but it also isolated me in a bubble of text and blue light screens that left my eyes dry and my brain tired. I thought Tinder would be the window to ventilate that stagnant room. It was an impulsive decision on a Sunday afternoon in July, one of those brutally hot days when Austin becomes an oven, and going outside means instantly breaking into a sweat. I was on my couch, bored, with the emotional hangover of a romantic series on Netflix that had left me with a taste of something my life didn't have. The ritual was the same as always, the one we all know, choosing photos with the perfect combination of attractiveness and carefreeness. I spent 2 hours reviewing my photo gallery, one of me at a concert smiling genuinely, another at Barton Springs in my green swimsuit with the crystal clear water behind me, a third, more casual one, in a cafe with my laptop and a cup of latte art. Nothing too posed. Nothing that screamed desperate. Writing the bio was more difficult. What do you say about yourself in 150 characters that sound smart, but not pretentious? Funny, but not trying too hard? I finally wrote, freelance writer. I love breakfast tacos, independent cinema, and real conversations. I promise not to talk only about my work. Then began the endless parade of faces. It was a marketplace, and I knew it. We were all products in a display window, evaluating each other in milliseconds with a swipe of the thumb. Left, left, left. Naked torsos in gyms, no thanks. Photos with dead fish, definitely not. Groups of 5 guys where you can't identify which one is the profile, next. Bios that just said, ask me, or worse, here for the views, pathetic. Occasionally right, when someone seemed to have a spark of personality or at least knew how to smile without looking like a predator or a loser. And then he appeared. His profile was surprisingly understated amid the noise. Mark. 34 years old. Consultant. He lived in Austin, just 3 miles away. 3 carefully selected photos. 1 profile shot where he was smiling slightly, wearing black horn-rimmed glasses that gave him a serious but friendly air. The kind of man who probably read The Economist and listened to political podcasts. He wore a light blue button-down shirt, nothing flashy. His hair was brown, short, and well-groomed. His face was pleasant. Not strikingly handsome in a way that makes you suspect he's too good to be true, but attractive in an accessible, normal way. The second photo showed him from behind on a hiking trail, wearing a backpack, looking out over a green valley. It was the kind of photo that says, I have hobbies, I enjoy nature, I don't spend all my free time playing video games. The third photo, slightly blurry as if someone else had taken it, showed him kneeling next to a golden retriever, scratching it behind the ears, both with expressions of genuine happiness. No shirtless photos at the gym flexing muscles. No photos on pretentious yachts or with luxury cars. No selfies from below that distorted his face. His bio was simple, but effective. I like the silence of the morning, well-made coffee, and meaningful conversations. Looking for someone who understands that the best nights aren't always the loudest. It was that discretion, that apparent normality and depth that attracted me. In a sea of loud profiles desperate for attention with phrases like, looking for my partner in crime, or give me your best bad joke, Mark seemed like a beacon of sanity and maturity. I swiped right. My heart skipped a beat when the screen popped up. It's a match. I waited to see if he would message me first. Some women have a policy of never messaging first, but I'm not one of them. However, there's something about waiting that tells you if the guy is really interested or just compulsively swiping right like so many do. 10 minutes later, his message arrived. Hi, Kiara. I saw you like independent films. Have you seen the latest Wes Anderson movie? I have opinions. Probably too many opinions for a Tinder message. It was perfect. Not a generic hey. Not a comment about my physical appearance. Not a boring question about my day. It was a real question about something in my profile, showing that he had read it. And with a touch of self-deprecating humor that made me smile, I replied, yes, I saw it last month. And there's always room for opinions about Wes Anderson, especially if they're controversial. Oh, they are controversial. I basically think his perfect aesthetic sometimes stifles the genuine emotion of his films, but I still watch them because they're visually stunning. And so it began. The conversation flowed with an ease I hadn't experienced in years. We talked about movies, and it turned out we both had a guilty love for bad romantic comedies from the 2000s. We talked about books. He was reading a biography of Teddy Roosevelt. I just finished a science fiction novel that Lena had recommended to me. We talked about Austin, how the city had changed in recent years, the best places to get tacos at 2 in the morning, how absurd it was to try to find parking on 6th Street on a Saturday night. We talked about our jobs. He was a management consultant, which sounded impressive, but which he admitted was basically making PowerPoint presentations for executives who won't read them. I told him about my freelance writing job, how I had started out writing for food and event blogs, but now mainly did boring but well-paid corporate content. "Do you miss writing things that matter to you?" he asked. The question took me aback with its insight. "All the time, but rent isn't paid with passion for writing." I get that. I think we all sell a piece of our soul for financial stability. The trick is not to sell too much. During that first week of messaging, we texted almost constantly. Good mornings when I woke up. Comments during the day about something funny I'd seen. Occasional photos. He sent me a picture of a latte with particularly impressive art. I sent him one of my plants that had miraculously not died. There were no suggestive propositions, no awkward questions about my sex life, or comments about my body. He was polite, witty, and above all, he seemed to really listen. He responded to things I had mentioned days ago, showing that he was paying attention. Lena was intrigued when I told her about him. "He sounds too good to be true," she said with her natural skepticism. "No one is that perfect on Tinder." "He's not perfect. He's just normal, and that makes him refreshing." "Have you Googled his name?" "Don't be paranoid. Kiara, always Google the guy before you go out with him. It's the ABCs of online dating." But I didn't. In hindsight, that was my first mistake. I didn't look him up because I didn't want to find anything that would burst the bubble. I wanted to believe in the version of Mark I was building through our messages, and looking up information about him felt like a betrayal of that budding trust. After a week of constant conversation one Friday night around 10 p.m., he asked me if I wanted to meet in person. "I've really enjoyed talking to you, Kiara, but I think real conversations are better, face to face. And would you like to grab a drink this week? Just one drink. In a public place. Whatever you prefer, no pressure." That last part reassured me. It showed respect for my boundaries, for my comfort. It wasn't aggressive or presumptuous. I said yes. We spent the next few days coordinating details. We chose the Roosevelt Room, a cocktail bar on the east side that was spacious, modern, dimly lit but not dark, and always crowded. It was public but not noisy, sophisticated but not pretentious. We agreed to meet on Wednesday at 8 p.m. I took all the standard precautions that every woman learns when going out with a stranger from the internet. I told Lena exactly where I was going to be, with whom, and sent her screenshots of his profile and our conversation. "If you don't hear from me by 8:30 p.m. to say that everything is okay, call the police," I said, only half jokingly. "I'll have my phone in my hand," Lena replied, "and I have pepper spray in my bag just in case, although it expired in 2015, so it would probably just irritate him." I also gave her information to my roommate, even though she didn't technically live with me. The apartment next door had such thin walls that I could hear her Netflix shows, so we had become friends of convenience. Her name was Sarah. She worked as a nurse, and she had that practical attitude that comes from working in the ER. "What's the emergency plan?" she asked when I told her about the date. "Text Lena every half hour. If I don't send one, she calls." "Good. And here's my number too. If you need me to show up with an emergency, just send me a pizza emoji, and I'll be there in 15 minutes saying your grandmother had an accident." It seemed dramatic, but it's every woman's survival manual when going out with a stranger. The statistics are constantly in our heads. 1 in 6 women will experience sexual violence. Harassment is so common that it's almost expected. And while most men are good, the problem is that you can't tell which ones aren't until it's too late. Wednesday arrived with that stifling August heat in Austin. I spent the afternoon trying to work, but unable to concentrate. I wrote and deleted the same paragraph about innovative business solutions about 10 times before giving up. At 6, I started getting ready. I took a long shower, shaved my legs, even though I wasn't planning on anything happening on the first date, put on lotion, and carefully applied my makeup, trying to make it look natural. What do I wear on a first date? Too dressed up, and you look desperate. too casual, and you look like you don't care. I finally chose some tight black jeans, a cream-colored sleeveless blouse with a little lace at the neck, and some low-heeled sandals. I left my hair down, falling over my shoulders, in waves that I had worked on for 20 minutes with the flat iron. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked good. Attractive, but not trying too hard. I called an Uber to get there. Always Uber on first dates, never drive yourself. That's another rule. That way you can drink if you want, and if things go badly, you don't have to worry about your car. The Roosevelt Room was on East 5th Street, a brick building with an unassuming sign. I arrived 10 minutes before 8. Always arrive first, another rule. You can choose where to sit, you can observe the place, you can be in control of the situation from the start. I walked in, and the place was exactly as I remembered it from the times I had come with Lena. Elegant, but not ostentatious, with exposed brick walls, dim lighting from vintage light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, and a long wooden bar where several bartenders in vests and suspenders were preparing elaborate cocktails. There were maybe 40 people in the place, which was perfect. Not so empty that we would feel exposed, not so crowded that we couldn't talk. I chose a high table near the bar, but with a view of the entrance. I wanted to be able to see when he arrived. I ordered a gin and tonic while I waited. My heart was beating fast, a mixture of anticipation, nerves, and that underlying fear that always accompanies you in these situations. What if he was a jerk? What if he looked nothing like his photos? What if there was no chemistry in person? What if the conversation died an agonizing death, and we had to sit there in uncomfortable silence? At 2 minutes past 8, I saw him walk in. It was him. My concerns about him looking different from his photos immediately dissipated. He was the same man in the photographs, even a little taller than I had estimated, maybe 6 feet. He was wearing a dark gray sports coat over a white shirt, dark jeans, and casual dress shoes. He looked good, professional but not stiff, as he looked around the bar for me. His eyes behind those horn-rimmed glasses had a slightly anxious expression that I found endearing. I raised my hand to get his attention. He saw me and his face lit up with a smile. Not a forced or nervous smile, but a genuine one that reached his eyes, wrinkling the corners slightly. He approached with a confident but not arrogant stride. "Kiara," he said when he reached the table, and my name sounded good coming from his mouth, pronounced with a calmness that rubbed off on me a little. "I'm so glad you could make it, and you're just as pretty as you are in your photos, which is a relief because 50% of Tinder is basically photo fraud." I laughed, relaxing a little. "Well, you're real too," which I appreciate. We gave each other a brief, proper hug, that awkward first date hug where neither person knows if it should be a formal handshake or a casual hug, so it ends up being something in between. He sat down across from me. A bartender approached, and he ordered an old-fashioned. "With bullet rye, if you have it," he specified. Someone who knew what he wanted. Point in his favor. The first half hour was perfect. Completely, wonderfully perfect, in a way that almost made me suspicious. But I was so hungry for human connection that I buried that little voice of doubt. We talked about everything and nothing. It turned out we had grown up only 100 miles apart. Him in Northern Oregon, me in Portland. We hadn't met before, but we shared cultural references, understood jokes about Pacific Northwest weather, had been to concerts at the same venues. We had similar tastes in music. We both loved the National. We had both gone through a Radiohead phase in college. We criticized the latest overrated superhero movie together. We laughed at how bad today's politicians are without falling into that first date trap where you talk too much about politics and end up discovering that you are fundamentally incompatible. He was a brilliant conversationalist, asking intelligent questions and listening to my answers with genuine interest. He didn't have that desperation to be liked that sometimes comes across on first dates, that anxious energy of someone trying too hard. He seemed comfortable in his own skin, confident without being arrogant. He had that kind of quiet confidence that is incredibly attractive. He made a funny comment about how pathetic some Tinder profiles could be. Yesterday, I saw one that just said, "Adventurer looking for partner in crime," as if we were at a Dungeons & Dragons convention, and we both laughed, creating an instant bond, a sense of us against the absurdity of the online dating world. I sent Lena a quick message under the table. "Everything's going well. He's charming. He talks like a normal person, as he hasn't mentioned his ex once. Miracle in Austin." I put my phone back in my bag, and I really meant it. I was having a good time. For the first time in months, I was on a date that didn't feel like work. We ordered a second round of drinks. He shared an anecdote about a particularly difficult client he'd had that week, a startup CEO who wanted to reinvent the cutlery industry and couldn't understand why his idea for digital forks wasn't attracting investors. The way he told it, with perfect comic timing and exaggerated voices, made me laugh so hard I had to cover my mouth. I told him about a project I'd had where a client wanted me to write a blog post about innovative synergies in the blockchain ecosystem, and when I asked him what that meant, he said, "I don't know, but it sounds impressive." He laughed, shaking his head. "Corporate work is 50% bullshit and 50% pretending that the bullshit makes sense." It was easy. That's the word that kept coming to mind. Everything was easy with him. There were no awkward silences. There were no moments where I wondered what to say next. The conversation flowed as if we had known each other for years. But then, little by little, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. It wasn't something he said or did in an explicit and alarming way. It was more subtle than that, more insidious, like when the temperature in a room drops degree by degree and you don't notice until you have chills. The conversation drifted to more personal topics. I had started talking about Austin, about how I had moved here looking for a fresh start after a breakup. He nodded sympathetically. "I get that. Sometimes you need physical distance to process emotional things." He paused. "Where are you originally from?" "Portland. Well, technically Beaverton, a suburb of Portland." "Nothing interesting." "I grew up in a small place too," he said, and something in his tone shifted slightly. He became more distant, perhaps. He swirled his whiskey glass between his fingers, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "Up north, almost on the Canadian border, a place called Cedar Fork. Do you know it?" I shook my head. I'd never heard of it. And I'd grown up in Oregon, so I knew most of the towns in the state. "I'm not surprised. It's very small. One of those places where everyone knows each other. Where the same 500 residents have been there for generations. Where nothing ever happens." He paused for a long time. "Until it does." His tone was neutral, but there was a darkness in his words that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It wasn't what he said exactly, but the way he said it, as if he were telling the beginning of a horror story. "And what happened?" I asked, more out of courtesy than real interest. Part of me wanted to steer the conversation back to lighter territory. "Oh, the usual small-town stuff," he replied, but his voice had lost the warmth it had had during the first half hour. "Rumors, gossip, secrets that everyone knows, but no one says out loud. People who disappear and no one asks questions because it's more comfortable not to know." I tried to downplay the matter. "Sounds like the premise of a Netflix series, like True Detective or something." He smiled, but this time the smile didn't reach his eyes. It was just a movement of his lips, mechanical, empty. Something like that. Only more real, more dirty. Television always cleans things up, you know? They make small mysteries seem interesting and real tragedies seem like entertainment. But when it's your life, when it's your town, there's no dramatic music or closing credits. There are just consequences. An uncomfortable silence settled between us for the first time that night. I chalked it up to him having had too much to drink and getting philosophical in that way people sometimes do When they're a little drunk and melancholy, I decided to change the subject, to steer us into calmer waters. "So, what brought you to Austin?" I asked in a deliberately light tone, apart from the hellish temperatures and the music scene. "A fresh start," he said quickly, too quickly, as if he had the answer prepared and rehearsed. "Cedar Fork. It got too small for me. Too many memories. Too many complications. Sometimes you need to leave to be able to breathe again." He smiled again, and once more I noticed that disconnect between the curve of his lips and the coldness of his gaze behind his glasses. His eyes watched me with an intensity that hadn't been there before, as if he were evaluating my reaction, measuring something. I began to feel uneasy in a way I couldn't articulate. He hadn't done anything objectively threatening. He hadn't touched me inappropriately. He hadn't said anything explicitly alarming. But my instinct, that instinct that women learn to listen to but often ignore because we don't want to seem dramatic or paranoid, was whispering to me that something wasn't right. I rummaged through my bag for my phone, looking for a distraction, a way to break the tension that had settled at our table like an unwelcome third guest. Maybe send another message to Lena, or check Instagram, or any excuse not to have to look at him directly for a moment. I took out my phone and the screen lit up automatically, and that's when I saw it. The screen was on my news feed. I'd been scrolling through CNN that morning while drinking coffee, and the app was still open. And there, at the top of the screen, under the red headline, "Breaking News," was a headline that made my blood run cold. "Manhunt continues. Cedar Fork murder suspect still at large." And below the headline, there was a photo of a younger man with longer, unkempt hair, no glasses, wearing a plain gray t-shirt, looking directly at the camera with a neutral expression. But it was unmistakably, undeniably, absolutely him. It was Mark. The world stopped. Not metaphorically. I literally felt as if time itself had frozen. The sounds of the bar, the laughter of other diners, the clinking of glasses, the background music playing, the murmur of conversations, all became a distant, distorted hum, as if I were underwater. My eyes, glued to the phone screen, read fragments of the article at a speed I didn't know was possible. The words were burned into my brain as if they were being branded with a hot iron. Linked to the disappearances of at least 3 women in the last 2 years. Remains found on rural property near Cedar Fork, Oregon. Last known residents abandoned. Neighbors report he left approximately 4 months ago. Considered extremely dangerous, do not approach. Police believe he may have left the state, possibly heading south. If you have any information, contact the FBI or local police immediately. There were more photos if you scrolled down. Search photos. Photos of a small house with yellow police tape. A photo of a forest with white forensic investigation tents. And another photo of him, this one more recent from what appeared to be a surveillance camera, where he looked almost exactly as he did now sitting across from me. The article had a date. It had been updated 4 hours ago. My heart started beating so hard that I thought I was going to throw up or pass out or both. My hands started shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. The air became thick, difficult to breathe, as if I were trying to inhale through a pillow. Everything fit together with terrifying precision that made my brain scream. His origin, Oregon, a small town in the north, Cedar Fork. His vague and obscure comments about the town, about people disappearing. His new start 4 months ago. The exact moment when, according to the article, he had left his home and disappeared before the police could question him. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be a coincidence. The statistical probability that I was sitting here, right now, having a drink with someone who happened to share the name and appearance of a nationally wanted murder suspect was essentially zero. It was him. I was sitting 3 feet away from a fugitive serial killer who had murdered at least 3 women and had probably used Tinder to find his next victim. I felt his gaze on me, that physical pressure of being watched. I lifted my head very slowly, as if swimming through molasses, with an effort that seemed superhuman. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, to flee, but I was paralyzed. He was still sitting in the same position, his whiskey glass in his hand, but his expression had completely changed. The feigned warmth of the first half of the date was gone. In its place was an absolute, almost scientific calm. He was watching me with an intensity that was clinical, like a biologist studying bacteria under a microscope. He seemed to be evaluating my reaction, calculating, processing. "Are you okay, Kiara?" he asked, his voice soft, almost gentle, but each word was like an ice knife cutting through my spine. "You've suddenly turned very pale." My mind was a whirlwind of pure, primitive panic. All the options raced through my head in nanoseconds. Scream. But we were in a noisy bar. Would anyone hear me? Or would they think it was a couple's argument? Get up and run. But we were sitting at high tables. I would have to get off the stool, which would take seconds. What if he was faster? What if he caught me? What if he had a weapon hidden under that sports coat? The article had said, "extremely dangerous." How desperate would he be? Would he do something here, in public, surrounded by witnesses? My survival instinct, that animal instinct we all have buried under layers of civilization, kicked in with crystal clarity. And it told me one thing: don't provoke him. Don't let him see that you know. Act normal. Your only chance of getting out of this alive is for him to believe you have no idea who he is. With a willpower I didn't know I possessed, with every ounce of control I could muster, I turned off the phone screen. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to use both to hold it. I hid them under the table quickly, clenching my fists against my thighs until my knuckles turned white and hurt. Yes, I'm fine," I managed to say, and my voice sounded shrill and fake even to my own ears. Too high-pitched, too fast, too obviously terrified. I cleared my throat, trying again. "It's just, I got a message from my roommate. A problem with the hot water. The heater broke again. It's the third time this month." I lied. I lied with every fiber of my being, constructing false details to make the lie seem real. The landlord is a disaster. He never fixes anything on time. And now Sarah is telling me the bathroom is flooded or something. It's just stressful. I'm sorry. I didn't want this to ruin the night. I kept talking, words tumbling out of my mouth, trying to fill the silence with manufactured normalcy. Every word was a performance. Every forced smile was a shield. I was giving the performance of my life, and I knew that if I failed, if he detected even a hint that I knew the truth, I might not make it out of this bar alive. He continued to stare at me for a few seconds that felt like hours. His eyes, behind those glasses that I now realized were probably a disguise, scrutinized me with an intensity that made me want to shrink and disappear. I could see his pupils moving slightly, scanning my face, looking for signs of deception. I kept my expression as neutral as possible. I even tried to force a tense smile, apologizing. "Roommates, right? There's always some drama." "Please," I thought. "Please believe me. Please don't know that I know. Please, God, if you're there, please." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded slowly. "Roommates," she repeated, and took a slow sip of her whiskey. "They can be complicated. I lived with roommates in my 20s, a different hell every month." The knot in my throat loosened a millimeter. He believed me. Or at least, he was pretending to believe me. I wasn't sure which was worse. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair with studied casualness, "do you need to go deal with that? I don't want to hold you if there's an emergency." It was a test. I could feel it. If I said yes, that I had to go, I would confirm his suspicions. I would prove that I was scared, that I wanted to escape. And then he would know that I knew. But if I said no, that I could stay, I would have to sit here with him, pretending everything was normal, every second an agony. No, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. Sarah can handle it. She's a nurse. She's used to emergencies. much more serious than a water heater. I'll tell her to call the landlord. I'll be fine. Are you sure? Because I can understand if you need... No, really. Sorry for the drama. I was enjoying our conversation. Another lie. Every word now was a lie, piled on top of another lie. Well, she said, and that chilling smile returned to her face. Me too. The rest of the date, because that's what it was, officially it was still a date, was surreal torture beyond anything I could have imagined. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life. Every second stretched like chewing gum, sticky and endless. I kept talking. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh. I nodded when he said things. I asked follow-up questions. I commented on the bar, on the music playing, on the cocktail I was drinking, which now tasted awful, but I kept drinking because I needed to do something with my hands and my mouth. Every laugh of mine was a stifled scream. Every word he said was a reminder that I was sitting across from a predator, a man wanted for multiple murders, a monster disguised as an Austin consultant with horn-rimmed glasses and polite conversation. And he seemed to have accepted my performance. He reverted to the charming Mark of the first half hour. He talked about a concert he wanted to see next month. He mentioned a new Thai restaurant that had opened on South Congress and suggested, with a casualness that gave me goosebumps, that maybe we could go together. If tonight goes well, he added with a smile he had probably practiced in a mirror. Sounds great, I said, my voice sounding fake even to me. I love Thai food. I had no idea if I liked Thai food. At that moment, I couldn't remember what I had eaten for breakfast. My brain was operating in pure survival mode, every circuit dedicated to keeping up the act, to not breaking down, to not screaming. Under the table, out of his sight, I pulled out my phone again. With fingers shaking so violently that it took me 3 tries, I opened my messages and found the conversation with Lena. I typed a single message without looking at the screen, hoping that autocorrect would make it legible. Real emergency. Call police. I'm with Cedar Fork Killer. Roosevelt room. He doesn't know I know. Help. I hit send without checking. Then I put the phone on silent and put it back in my bag. The whole process took maybe 20 seconds. I kept a smile on my face the whole time, nodding to something Mark was saying about local politics that I wasn't processing at all. He glanced at his watch, a simple steel watch on his left wrist. Well, it's getting late. It's almost 10. I should probably think about leaving. I have a meeting early tomorrow with a client. Wednesday. It was Wednesday, a weeknight. Of course, he would mention work, normal details, mundane routine, the mask of normality I wore with such practice. Blood rushed back into my veins with such overwhelming relief that I almost felt dizzy. He was leaving. This was going to end. I was going to survive this. I just had to keep up the act for a few more minutes. Yeah, I have work tomorrow too. I lied. I was freelance. I could work whenever I wanted, but I needed an excuse, a normal reason to end the night. It's been really nice meeting you. It's been great, Kiara, he said, getting up from his stool. I did the same, my legs feeling like jelly but somehow staying firm. He took out his wallet and left enough cash on the table to cover his share, plus a generous tip. Everything was so normal, so civilized, as if we were just 2 people who had had a pleasant date. He leaned toward me. My entire body tensed, every muscle ready to fight or flee. But he just leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. His lips were a brief cold pressure against my skin that made me want to scream and scratch where he had touched me. I hope we can do this again, he said softly, too close to my ear. I like you, Kiara. I think we could have something special. Yes, definitely, I managed to say, though the words seemed to come from far away, from someone else. I'll text you. I hope you do. He held my gaze for a second too long. Take care. Austin can be dangerous at night for a woman alone. The irony of that statement was like a punch in the stomach. He, a fugitive serial killer, was warning me about danger. It was so absurd that I almost laughed hysterically, but I managed to hold it in. I'll keep that in mind, I said. I watched him walk toward the bar's exit. I watched his back, the gray sports coat, the jeans, his relaxed posture as he walked away. I watched him push open the glass door, step out onto the brightly lit street of Austin, and disappear into the night like any other normal guy after any other normal date. I stood by our table, clinging to the edge to keep my balance. My mind screamed to run in the opposite direction, to go out the back door, to flee. But my legs wouldn't obey me. I was shaking so violently that my teeth were chattering. The people around me continued laughing, drinking, living their normal lives, completely unaware of what had just happened. To them, I was just another woman on a date. To me, I had just survived an encounter with a killer. My phone vibrated in my purse. I fumbled it out with shaking hands. It was Lena, calling. I answered immediately. "Kiara, what the hell? Are you okay? Your message..." Her voice was thick with panic. "Call 911, I said, my voice coming out in a harsh whisper. "Tell them the suspect in the Cedar Fork murders is in Austin. Tell them I just went on a date with him. Tell them his Tinder profile says his name is Mark, 34 years old, consultant. Tell them I already called. The police are on their way to your location. Is he still there?" "No, he left a minute ago, down the street. I don't know which direction. Stay where you are. Don't go outside." The police are 5 minutes away. But I couldn't stay still. My legs finally started working, and I ran to the nearest bartender, a young guy with a hipster beard and a flannel shirt. "I need you to call the police," I said, my voice rising. "The man I was with..." "Miss, are you okay?" The bartender looked at me with concern. "No, I'm not okay. The man who just left is a fugitive. He's a murderer. The police are looking for him. You need to close the exits. You need to..." The bar manager appeared, a woman in her 40s with an alarmed expression. "We already called 911. The police are on their way. Do you need to sit down? Do you need water?" I sat down on a bar stool because my legs finally gave out. Someone put a glass of water in my hands. I tried to drink, but my hands were shaking so much that I spilled half of it on my blouse. Sirens could be heard minutes later, growing louder. Police cars pulled up in front of the bar, blue and red lights painting the brick walls. Officers entered, hands on their guns, scanning the place. "Who called about the suspect at Cedar Fork?" asked one of them, an officer with a gray mustache and a serious expression. "I did," I said, raising a trembling hand. "I was on a date with him. He left..." I looked at my phone. 7 minutes ago. He walked out the front door. What followed was a blur of questions, statements, showing them photos from his Tinder profile, describing what he was wearing, where he had walked when he left. 2 officers ran out into the street talking on their radios. More police arrived. Someone in plain clothes who identified himself as Detective Martinez from the Austin Police Department began asking me more detailed questions. "How long were you with him?" "About an hour and a half, from 8 o'clock. "Did he tell you where he was going after that?" "He said he had work tomorrow, a meeting with a client. He didn't give any details." "Did he mention where he lived?" "Any address?" "No, just that he had been in Austin for a few months, that he was from Oregon, from Cedar Fork." "Do you have his Tinder messages, his profile?" With fingers still shaking, I opened the app and showed him everything. The detective took photos of the screen with his own phone. Other officers were talking to the bar staff, checking if they had security cameras, asking for footage from that night. I sat there for over 2 hours, answering the same questions from different officers, each one verifying details, building a profile of the night's events. The bar was eventually evacuated. The other customers were briefly interviewed and sent home. Only I, the staff, and what seemed like half the Austin Police Department remained. Lena arrived at some point, shaking off an officer who tried to stop her. "She's my best friend," she said authoritatively. "She needs someone here." She hugged me so tightly that my ribs hurt, and I cried for the first time since it had all happened. Big, ugly sobs that had been held back for 2 hours of maintaining composure. "I'm sorry," I kept saying between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I should have Googled him like you said. I should have... No, Lena interrupted me firmly. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. That son of a bitch is a liar and a predator. You just survived. That's all that matters. Around 11:30 p.m., Detective Martinez returned with news. We have units searching within a 5-mile radius. We've alerted all hotels, motels, and Airbnbs in the area with his photo. His Tinder profile has been reported and will likely be deleted in the next few hours. We've shared his description with the TSA at the airport in case he tries to leave town. We've contacted the FBI since this is a multi-state case. Are they going to catch him? I asked. Martinez paused. We're going to do everything we can, Miss Chen, but he's been smart so far. 4 months without being detected. Multiple states. He knew what he was doing using a dating app. It's easy to create fake profiles, give false information. He probably has multiple identities ready. Then he could escape again. It's possible, Martinez admitted, but now we have his last known location. We have a fresh timeline. We have a clearer picture of how he operates. Those are advantages we didn't have before. And most importantly, thanks to you and your incredible calm under pressure, we know he's active in Austin. He's using Tinder. He's still looking for victims. That information is invaluable. Lena drove me home around midnight. Detective Martinez said they would contact me if there were any updates, and that someone would come by tomorrow for a more detailed formal statement. She gave me her card. Call me if you remember any other details. Anything he said, any comments that seemed strange, everything matters. Sarah, my next-door roommate, was waiting in the hallway when I got home. Holy shit, Kiara. Lena texted me. Are you okay? No, I said honestly, but I'm alive. The 3 of us sat in my apartment. Lena checked every lock twice. Sarah pulled out a bottle of whiskey she kept for emergencies. None of us could sleep. We just sat on my couch, all the lights on, staring out the window at the quiet street, every passing car making us all tense. At 2 a.m, my phone rang. It was Detective Martinez. Miss Chen, we have good news. We found him. My heart stopped. What? One of our units saw him walking on East Cesar Chavez, about 8 blocks from the Roosevelt Room. He tried to run. We chased him. We arrested him 15 minutes ago. He's in custody. I started crying again, this time out of pure relief. Are you sure it's him? Absolutely sure. His ID is fake, as we expected, but his fingerprints match those from the crime scene in Oregon. It's definitely him. And thanks to your testimony, we have evidence that he tried to contact another potential victim using a fake profile. That's multiple additional charges on top of the murders in Oregon. Is he going to prison? He's going to prison for the rest of his life, Miss Chen. I guarantee it. This is a federal case now. Multiple states, multiple victims. He's not going to see the light of day again. When I hung up, Lena and Sarah looked at me with hopeful expressions. They got him, I said. He's under arrest. It's over. Lena hugged me. Sarah laughed with disbelief and relief. The 3 of us cried, a tangled knot of arms and tears, and the release of 2 hours of concentrated terror. The next few days were a whirlwind of interviews with the police, the FBI, prosecutors. My testimony, along with digital evidence from Tinder and the bar's security cameras, built a solid case of attempted kidnapping and premeditated murder. The details of his crimes in Oregon were gradually revealed in the news. They were worse than I had imagined. Much worse. The 3 women he had killed were all the same age as me, in their 20s to early 30s. They had all disappeared after dates. The police believed he had also used dating apps at the time, but with different profiles. He had killed them and hidden the bodies on rural properties near Cedar Fork. They had only been found when a hunter stumbled upon the first one. The investigation had led to the other 2, and eventually to suspicion of him, but by then he was gone. In my formal statement, I had to describe every moment of the date in exhaustive detail, his words, his expressions, His comments about Cedar Fork that now clearly looked like thinly veiled confessions. Prosecutors said my testimony about how he had deceived me, how he had constructed a completely false persona, was crucial to proving premeditation. The trial would not be for months, maybe years. But they assured me that with the physical evidence from Oregon plus my testimony plus the digital evidence, it was a closed case. He would spend the rest of his life in maximum security federal prison. I deleted Tinder the next day. I deleted all dating apps. I turned down 3 interview requests from news outlets that wanted the story of the woman who had dinner with a murderer and survived. I didn't want to be that story. I didn't want that night to define my life. But it took time to feel normal again. Weeks where I couldn't be alone at night. Months where every man with glasses on the street made me tense. Therapy, lots of therapy. To process the trauma of having been minutes, maybe seconds, away from becoming his 4th victim. Lena moved in with me for a month, sleeping on my couch, refusing to leave me alone until the prosecutor confirmed that he would remain in custody without the possibility of bail. Sarah checked my locks every night. My mother flew in from Portland and stayed for a week, cooking meals and just being there. But I was alive. I had survived. And the 3 women in Oregon, whose names I learned, Jennifer, Michelle, Amanda, would finally have justice. Their families would have closure. And who knows how many other women in Austin and beyond were saved because the police had caught him that night before he could find another victim. I always had dates through Tinder, and they all went great. It sounds like bragging, I know, but in the context of my life at the time, it was simply a fact. I was 24 years old, had a stable job as a graphic designer at a Chicago startup called Pixel and Bloom, a decent apartment in Wicker Park, a 2nd floor with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and a window overlooking a street lined with coffee shops and record stores, and the naive confidence of someone who thinks they've cracked the code to modern life. The app was, for me, a catalog of simple, uncomplicated possibilities. A couple of witty messages, a date for drinks in a bar with dim lighting and background music, and if there was chemistry, a mutual, adult agreement to spend the night together. Everything clean, safe, and consensual. It was the world under my control, a game whose rules I believed I mastered with the precision of a chess player. My Tinder profile was a minefield of precautions, carefully designed to filter out the dangerous and attract the interesting. I had 3 photos, one of me smiling at an outdoor concert, wearing sunglasses and an indie band t-shirt, another in a cafe, with a cup of coffee and an open sketchbook, and the third, more recent, at Lake Michigan at sunset, with the city skyline behind me. My bio was brief but revealing. Graphic designer, lover of 70s cinema, strong coffee, and conversations that last until dawn. Looking for someone to waste time with, not my mind. I never lied about my name, age, or profession. I believed transparency was the best defense, and it worked. The women I met were usually intelligent, independent, with their own well-structured lives. Our dates were short, pleasant, and if there was no spark, we said goodbye with a smile and it was a pleasure. If there was, we spent the night together, no promises, no expectations. It was a modern, civilized dance, and I considered myself a master of it. But beyond the profile, I had rules. Strict, almost military rules. First, I always met at a downtown bar or cafe, preferably in my neighborhood or in Logan Square, where I knew the owners and where there were security cameras. Second, I always told a friend where I was and who I was with. I sent them the person's name, a screenshot of their profile, and the exact address of the place. Third, I always drove myself so I could make a quick getaway if things got uncomfortable. And most importantly, I trusted my instincts. My instincts until then had been infallible. It had saved me from tedious conversations with guys who only wanted to talk about their cryptocurrencies, from inflated egos who thought they were the center of the universe, and from a guy who turned out to be married and used a profile picture of his nephew to look younger. I believed I could detect bad vibes from a mile away. It was my sixth sense, my moral compass in a digital world full of masks. So when I came across Anya's profile, none of my alarms went off. On the contrary, it was a Friday night. I was at home with a craft beer in my hand and a David Lynch movie on pause when her profile appeared on my screen. Her photos showed a woman my age with short, messy black hair, as if she had just gotten out of bed, and a shy but genuine smile. There were no sensual poses, no exaggerated filters, no party backgrounds. Just images of her in a botanical garden, her hands clasped behind her back, looking at an orchid, another reading in a hammock on a porch overlooking a lake, and a third, more intimate one with a Siamese cat on her lap, stroking it with her eyes closed. Her bio was simple, almost poetic. New to Chicago, I like silence, morning coffee, and getting lost in used bookstores. Looking for someone to share a book and a cup of tea with, not necessarily in that order. She seemed authentic, a haven of calm in the bustling and sometimes cynical world of apps. There were no red flags, no ambiguous phrases like looking for adventure or no strings attached. Just a woman who seemed as tired of the noise of the world as I was. I liked her. She liked me back. The automatic Tinder message appeared. "It's a match," she wrote first the next day. "Hi, I liked your photo at the lake. Is that Oak Street Beach?" I replied, "Yes. My favorite place to clear my head when design goes crazy. What about you? Where are you originally from?" That's how our conversation began. We talked for a few days. Her conversation was calm, a little shy. Like her photos. She used complete sentences without unnecessary abbreviations. She didn't send excessive emojis or voice messages. We agreed on our taste in independent films. She loved Kelly Reichardt, I loved Jim Jarmusch, and on our aversion to crowds, social media, and the false urgency of modern life. She told me she had worked as an archivist in a library in Portland, but had moved to Chicago to be closer to her family. "My mother is sick," she wrote. "It's not serious, but she needs company. So I came to live with them for a while." It was a plausible explanation. Human. When I suggested we meet up, she agreed immediately. "I'm a little embarrassed," she wrote, "but I moved to a house a little way out in the suburbs with my family. It's quieter. Would you mind if we met here? We can watch a movie. I promise I don't bite." Normally, that proposal would have set off all my alarm bells. Going to someone's house on a first date, and on the outskirts of town at that, went against all my rules. It was the #1 rule that all the safety articles on the internet repeated ad nauseum. Never go to someone's house on a first date. But with Anya, my instincts, which I trusted so much, whispered that it was okay. I attributed it to her shyness, her authenticity. I thought that maybe she felt safer in her own space, that the idea of going out to a bar made her nervous. Maybe her mother was home, or her sister. Maybe she was a deeply private person like me. I said yes. I told my roommate, Mike, the address. It was a Saturday afternoon. We were in the kitchen. He was making a smoothie, and I was checking the map on my phone. "Holloway Street, number 159, I said. "It's about 40 minutes from the city." Mike frowned. "Out in the suburbs, in a house. George, are you serious?" "Yes," I said, trying to sound confident. "But it's with her family. Her mother is sick. She's a normal person, Mike." He looked at me skeptically, but didn't insist. He just said, "If you don't text me by 2 in the morning, I'm calling the police." I patted him on the shoulder. "Don't worry. With my track record, I'm sure she's a great girl." I left Chicago shortly after 7 p.m. The sky was clear, with an orange sunset reflecting off the glass buildings downtown. I put on a smooth jazz playlist in the car, Miles Davis, Chet Baker, and drove with the windows down, letting the cool spring air clear my head. At first, Everything was normal. The streets were bustling with life, couples walking, bars with crowded terraces, the constant murmur of the city. But as I drove away from downtown, the landscape began to change. Tall buildings gave way to single-family homes, then industrial areas, and finally more rural areas, with empty fields and scattered woods. The GPS guided me beyond the city limits, into a suburb that faded into darkness. The well-lit, lively streets gave way to dark roads with sparse streetlights and long stretches of darkness between them. The trees grew closer to the asphalt, forming tunnels that swallowed the light from my headlights. The address corresponded to a single-family home at the end of a gravel road, half hidden by thick trees. It looked old, with a slightly warped porch and wooden shutters covering the ground floor windows. Only a dim light filtered through a window upstairs, flickering like a candle about to go out. I stopped the car a short distance away, with a slight twinge of doubt in my stomach. I looked at my phone. It was 8:47 p.m. I sent Mike a message. "I'm here. Everything's fine. The house is a little old, but quiet." Then I took a deep breath and got out of the car. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. There was no sound, no crickets, no cars, no voices, just the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I approached the door and knocked. 3 soft knocks. The seconds of waiting seemed like an eternity. Finally, the door opened. But it wasn't Anya. On the doorstep stood an elderly man, about 70 years old, bald, with thick glasses and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, which were a pale, watery blue, like dirty ice. He was wearing a brown sweater that was too big for his thin frame, and he smelled of cold tobacco and medicine. "Yes?" I asked, confused, looking back to see if I had come to the wrong house. "You're George, right?" said the man, his voice a rough trickle, like sandpaper. Come in. Anya's upstairs, finishing getting ready. I'm her uncle. I've been looking after her since she moved in." Something inside me shuddered. The explanation was plausible. But his presence, his energy was deeply jarring. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a cold curiosity, like that of a scientist observing a rat in a maze. However, before I could process it or come up with an excuse, he took a step back, in a gesture of invitation that was both polite and authoritative. The door opened onto a dark, smelly hallway, closed and dusty. Stupidity, mixed with an upbringing that prevented me from being rude, that damn habit of not wanting to offend, of not wanting to seem rude, made me cross the threshold. It was the mistake that would divide my life into a before and after. The door closed behind me with a dull final click, and in that instant, the uncle's facade vanished. His smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of cold assessment. "This way," he said, pointing to a door on the left. It was no longer a suggestion. It was an order. "Look, I think I'd better go," I said, turning toward the door, my heart beginning to gallop like a frightened horse. That's when 2 figures emerged from the darkness of the hallway. They were younger, perhaps in their 30s, with the sturdy build of those who do physical labor. One had a scar across his left eyebrow, the other had a thick beard and bloodshot eyes. Both had the same pale, cold eyes as the older man. His sons, I knew immediately. One of them stood between me and the door, while the other grabbed my arm with such force that I cried out in pain. His fingers dug into my biceps like steel claws. "I don't think so," said the older man calmly. "The evening has just begun." What followed was a blur of terror and violence. They dragged me into a room at the back of the house, a kind of living room with old furniture covered with yellowed white sheets and a carpet stained with something I didn't want to identify. The walls were covered with peeling wallpaper, and in one corner was an old television set, turned off. Struggling was useless. They were too strong. I tried to kick, bite, scream, but one of them punched me in the stomach with his fist, and the air rushed out of my lungs as if I had been stabbed. I doubled over, coughing, as they dragged me across the floor. The older man, whom I heard called Walter, watched everything with the same terrifying calm, giving instructions in a low voice, as if he were directing a macabre play. "Tie him up tight," he said. "We don't want him to hurt himself prematurely." They beat me until I had no strength left, until the pain became a constant fog clouding my thoughts. They tied my hands and feet with plastic zip ties, tightening them until I felt the circulation cut off. And then the real hell began. The abuse was systematic, methodical, a routine of humiliation and pain designed to break me completely. There was no passion in their actions, only mechanical efficiency, as if they were performing a household chore. One of the sons held me down, while the other did what he had to do. Walter didn't participate physically in the same way, but his presence was the worst part. He watched, sometimes making comments. "Look how she trembles. Don't cry, that only makes it worse." Other times taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. He was the architect, the mastermind. His sons were his brutal tools. Time lost all meaning. There was no day or night in that room with the shutters closed. There were only cycles of pain, unconsciousness, and a fear so deep that it had become the air I breathed. They gave me crumbs of stale bread and sips of lukewarm water in a metal cup, just enough to keep me alive. I heard their voices in other parts of the house, sometimes laughing, sometimes arguing. One night, I heard Walter say, "We have to be more careful with the profiles. That last one was too noisy." And his son replied, "But this one is perfect. Young, alone, no family nearby." They were a family of monsters who had kidnapped me for their own amusement. I tried to plead, to reason, to scream. "Please, someone is waiting for me. My friend knows where I am." But my pleas only seemed to excite them more. Walter smiled and said, "Let him come. We have room for one more." My humanity had ceased to exist for them. I was an object, a broken toy in their basement of horrors. The worst part was the normality with which they carried out this atrocity. Walter could be talking about the electricity bill and, 5 minutes later, supervising a new torture session. I spent almost 4 days like this. 4 days in which my world was reduced to 4 dirty walls, the smell of my own fear, and the impassive faces of my captors. I had given up all hope. My former self, the confident George, who dominated the game of Tinder, had been annihilated. All that remained was a broken shell, waiting for the end. And then on the morning of the 4th day, something strange happened. I heard a heated argument in the hallway. Raised voices, Walter, speaking with an urgency I had never heard before. "They know too much. We have to go. Now." "What about him?" asked one of his sons. "Leave him. He's no use anymore. Let him rot." I didn't hear the answer. I only heard hurried footsteps going up and down the stairs, doors slamming, then the sound of an engine starting and quickly driving away down the gravel driveway. A deathly silence filled the house. At first, I thought it was another one of his tactics, a cruel game to give me false hope before returning. I lay still, holding my breath, listening to every little creak in the house. Minutes passed, then an hour. The silence was absolute. With superhuman effort, I managed to crawl to the door. It was locked, as always. But from the floor, I could see the crack under the door. There was no light, no movement. I shouted, my voice hoarse and weak. "Hello, please." Only the echo answered me. They had disappeared. Hope, then, was as painful as despair. Was it real, or was it a more refined form of torture? I spent the whole day and the following night in that limbo, fearing at every moment that I would hear their footsteps again. I survived by licking the condensation from a pipe that ran along one corner of the room. The next morning, I heard a different sound. It wasn't the engine of their car. It was the rumbling of a diesel engine, and then authoritative voices. "Police! Open the door!" I couldn't believe it. I tried to scream, but only a hoarse whimper came out. I pounded on the door with what little weight I had. The banging on the front door grew louder, and then the crash of wood giving way. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The lock on my door was blown apart. The light from the hallway blinded me. 2 police officers, wearing bulletproof vests and with their guns drawn, stood at attention in the doorway. Their faces, hardened by their profession, contorted into expressions of horror and pity when they saw me there, lying on the floor, dirty, bruised, and barely recognizable as a human being. One of them approached, speaking in a soft, calm tone. "Calm down, kid. You're safe now. I'm Officer Miller. Are you George?" I nodded, unable to speak. Tears, the first real tears since it all began to run down my face, washing away the dirt. Mike, my partner, had called the police when I didn't send him the message. They had tracked my phone to the area, and a report from a neighbor about noise and suspicious activity in the abandoned house. That's what they called it, abandoned. Gave them the final push to go in. They took me away in an ambulance. There was the hospital, endless questions from police and psychologists, the look of pain in my parents' eyes. The house was a place they knew well. Walter and his sons were a family of criminals with a history of assault and fraud, but nothing on this scale. They had fled, and as far as I know, they were never caught. Now, years later, I still bear the scars. Not just the physical ones. The deepest one is that of betrayal. The betrayal of my own instinct. The one I trusted so much. The app that was an amusement park to me turned out to be bait for an unimaginable trap. I am no longer that confident, George. I am a man who looks twice over his shoulder, who shudders at unexpected noises, who cannot trust a friendly smile. And when I see someone swiping their finger across a screen, looking for a connection, an encounter, I can only think of the darkness that may lurk behind a photo of a shy girl with a cat on her lap. Because monsters don't always have fangs and claws. Sometimes they have Tinder profiles, and they invite you to their house to watch a movie. And by then, it's too late. My name is Martina. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how a seemingly harmless decision, swiping on a dating app on a Tuesday night, led me to the brink of death, a dark place where pain became my constant companion, and hope a luxury I could not afford. I live in a medium-sized city in central Spain, a place called Zaragoza, where the pace of life is a monotonous cycle that traps you like an invisible spiderweb. Cobblestone streets echoing with the footsteps of hurried passers-by in the morning. The smell of freshly ground coffee from the corner cafes where I drink my cortado with milk before going to work. And the bustle of local markets with fresh fruit stalls dripping with orange juice and the aroma of warm bread fresh from the oven. My apartment is a small but cozy space in the old town, with exposed brick walls that absorb the summer heat and a tiny balcony where I hang sheets in the sun on weekends, the wind bringing the distant sound of church bells and the Ebro River murmuring in the distance. I work as an accountant in a gray bureaucratic office at a logistics company, a place where days merge into a routine of numbers and balance sheets. I arrive at 8:30 a.m. with my black leather bag loaded with folders, turn on my computer humming with its internal fan, and spend hours typing numbers into Excel, the click-clack of the keyboard like a metronome marking the passage of time, answering calls from suppliers with monotonous voices, arguing about overdue invoices or shipping errors. It's not an exciting job. I dreamed of being a writer of romance novels, the kind that paint perfect loves with happy endings, where the heroine finds her prince in a dusty library or a Parisian cafe. But reality anchored me to this life of numbers and fixed schedules. A modest salary that pays the rent of 650 euros a month and the electricity bills that rise with the heat. I had always been an independent woman, the kind who pays her bills on time and doesn't need anyone else to be happy, but lately I felt a void that social media seemed to fill temporarily, a hole in my chest that expanded with each lonely night on the sofa, eating canned tuna salads in front of the television, flickering with drama series, where the protagonist found love in unlikely twists and turns. I had a group of friends from work: Laura, the extrovert who organized karaoke nights where the microphone resonated with Whitney Houston songs, and Carmen, the pragmatist who always had advice on finances, with whom I would occasionally go out to bars with dim lights and cocktails that tasted like tropical fruits. But those outings were rare, interspersed with weekends where I lost myself in books or walks through the Tubo, the old town with its taverns that smelled of red wine and fried tapas. The emptiness grew, a loneliness that made me question whether my life was just that: numbers, routines, and postponed dreams. It was on a dating app called Star Encounters, one of those platforms with algorithms that promise perfect matches based on detailed profiles, where I saw Daniel's profile for the first time, on a rainy Sunday afternoon when the water was tapping on the window like impatient fingers. His photo showed him smiling with a confidence that radiated from the screen, intense brown eyes that seemed to look directly into mine, short dark hair styled with gel that shone in the evening light, and an athletic body suggested by the tight t-shirt that outlined firm pecs and muscular arms, as if he spent hours in the gym lifting weights that clanged on the rubber floor. Travel engineer, adventure lover, looking for someone to share the world with, his bio said, with an additional photo of him on an exotic beach, waves breaking at his feet and a surfboard under his arm. He wrote to me that same afternoon. "Hi, Martina. Your smile lights up my feed. Shall we chat? I love how you talk about books in your profile." The message took me by surprise. I had put in my bio that I loved romantic novels with happy endings, the kind that paint eternal love, where the heroine finds her prince in a dusty library or a Parisian cafe with the aroma of freshly baked croissants. And he had noticed, a detail that made me feel seen for the first time in months. At first, I responded cautiously, typing with fingers that hesitated on the virtual keyboard, remembering warnings from friends about fake profiles and dates that ended in disappointment. "Hi, Daniel. Thank you, I'm glad you like it. What book are you reading now?" I wrote, a sure hook. His reply came within minutes. "I just finished Coelho's The Alchemist. It made me think about pursuing dreams. How about you?" We chatted that night, messages flowing like a river. He about his engineering projects on train routes crossing deserts. I about my work frustrations with balance sheets that didn't add up and bosses breathing down my neck during reviews. He told me stories about his travels, climbing mountains in Peru where the air was so thin that he gasped for breath with every step, and the views of snow-capped peaks rewarded the effort. Surfing in Bali with waves that roared like beasts and salt spray sticking to his skin. I told him about my desire to escape the routine, to feel alive again, to dream of beaches where the sun would kiss my skin and the sea would wash away my worries. After 2 weeks of daily chats that lasted until midnight, with notifications vibrating like promises in the darkness of my room, he invited me to dinner. There's a cozy Italian place downtown with homemade pasta and wine that tastes like summer. Are you coming this Friday? My pulse quickened, a drum in my chest. I hadn't been out with anyone in 6 months, since that disastrous date with a guy who only talked about his ex. "Yes, I'd love to," I typed, feeling a nervous flutter in my stomach like butterflies set free. Friday arrived with a mixture of nerves and excitement that had me bouncing on my toes all day at the office, ignoring the numbers on the computer screen that blurred with my distraction. I carefully got ready in my small bathroom, with white tiles and a mirror fogged up from the shower steam. A tight black dress that hugged my curves, firm C-cup breasts highlighted by the subtle neckline, a narrow waist accentuated by the cut, and rounded hips outlined by the stretch fabric, subtle makeup with eyeliner that made my green eyes sparkle like emeralds, and black heels that gave me a few extra inches, making my legs look endless. I looked at myself in the mirror, turning to admire how the dress fit my ass with a perfect curve that made my heart beat faster, spraying myself with perfume with notes of jasmine and vanilla that mingled with the scent of my body lotion. "You look irresistible," I said to myself, smiling at my reflection, adjusting a strand of wavy brown hair that fell over my shoulder. I arrived at the restaurant at 8 o'clock sharp, the taxi dropping me off at the entrance with the smell of garlic and tomato wafting out of the open doors. He was standing at the entrance wearing a white shirt that outlined his firm pecs and dark chinos that hugged his thighs, his woody cologne enveloping me as he embraced me with controlled strength, his lips brushing my cheek in a kiss that left a trail of heat. "Martina, you're even more beautiful in person," he said, his deep voice sending a shiver down my spine, his brown eyes scanning my figure with an appreciation that made me blush. Dinner was magical at first, a prelude to what seemed like the beginning of something real. We sat at a secluded table in the corner of the restaurant, lit by flickering candles that cast soft shadows on the exposed brick walls, the aroma of fresh pasta and basil floating in the air. We ordered spaghetti carbonara with crispy pancetta that melted on the tongue, and a bottle of Chianti that glowed ruby red in the crystal glass. We chatted nonstop, the wine loosening our tongues. He talked about his engineering projects on train routes that crossed arid deserts where the sun burned the skin and the wind brought fine sand. And I talked about my work frustrations, with balance sheets that didn't add up due to decimal errors, and bosses who breathed down my neck during reviews with stale coffee on their breath. His laugh was contagious, a deep sound that vibrated in my chest, and when his hand covered mine on the polished wooden table, feeling the warmth of his palm against my skin, I felt a heat rise up my arm to my face. "You're fascinating, Martina," he murmured. His eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made me swallow hard, the wine leaving a sweet aftertaste on my tongue. The tiramisu arrived as a perfect ending, creamy and dusted with cocoa that melted in my mouth. And when he suggested, "Would you like to continue the evening at my place? I have excellent coffee from Colombia and a view of the city from the terrace that you'll love." His gaze was magnetic, a magnet that drew my will, and the alcohol clouding my judgment with a warm veil. I nodded with a shy smile. "Sounds perfect." We took a taxi to his residential neighborhood on the outskirts, a quiet area with two-story single-family homes with well-kept gardens where porch lights flickered yellow, the driver chatting about the night traffic as the wine buzzed in my veins. He took my hand as we entered his house, a gesture that made me feel protected, and the place seemed cozy at first glance. A black leather sofa in the living room with soft cushions that invited you to sink in. A modern kitchen with a polished granite island that reflected the light from LED spotlights, and dark wood shelves filled with hardcover architecture books that smelled of new paper and exotic travels. He poured me steaming coffee in white ceramic cups, with the rich aroma of roasted beans rising like steam, and we sat close on the sofa, our knees touching. The kiss began softly, his lips tasting mine with a tenderness that surprised me, his hand on the back of my neck pulling me closer, but soon it became hungry, his tongue invading my mouth with urgency, exploring with a taste of wine and mint. His hands moved up my back, unzipping my dress with skilled fingers that sent sparks down my spine, and I responded at first, excited by the chemistry crackling in the air, my body arching against his. But when he tried to pull my dress down completely, exposing my breasts to the cool air of the room, I pulled away slightly, my heart beating with a mixture of desire and caution. "Wait, Daniel, let's take it slow. I don't want to rush things." His expression changed in an instant, his brown eyes hardening like stone, and a crooked smile appeared on his lips, a rictus that was anything but warm. "Don't be shy, Martina. You know you want it. I saw you on the app posing like a goddess. This is what you're looking for." His voice was a low growl. The playful tone evaporated, and fear tangled in my chest like a cold snake, squeezing my breath. "No, Daniel, not like this. I want to go home." I tried to get up from the sofa, the leather sticky against my skin, but his hand closed around my wrist like an iron claw, fingers digging into flesh until it hurt. "Stay. I'm not asking you." The voice was a hiss, and panic rose in my throat like bitter bile. "Please let go of me. This isn't right. I don't like it." He laughed, a hollow, cruel sound that reverberated in the room like an echo in an empty cave, his grip tightening until I felt my bones crack. "You're not going anywhere, bitch. You're going to give me what I want." Before I could scream, his right fist flew toward my face with a speed I didn't anticipate, bone against bone in a devastating impact that resonated in my skull like thunder. The pain was immediate and blinding, a crack in my jaw that left my vision blurred with exploding stars, and I fell from the sofa to the carpeted floor, the impact on my elbow sending a wave of agony up my arm. The taste of blood flooded my mouth from a split lip that opened like a red flower, and I spat a clot onto the carpet, staining the beige with dark red. "Help. Please, someone," I screamed, my voice choked with shock, but he covered my mouth with a huge, calloused hand, fingers pressing my lips until they hurt, muffling my words in a desperate muffling. His eyes glowed with animal fury, pupils dilated like black wells. He dragged me by my hair, strips of brown locks torn out in the struggle that made me scream in pain at my scalp, each tug an agony that blinded me with tears, toward the kitchen, my heels scraping the hardwood floor with a squeaking sound that no one would hear in the isolated house. Each step was a tug that made me moan, the cold floor against my knees when I stumbled, and he cursed under his breath, "Damn bitch, stay still." He threw me against the polished granite island, my hip hitting the sharp edge first, an instant bruise forming under my skin like a purple flower that throbbed with every heartbeat. I tried to scratch his face, my red nails leaving red gashes on his cheek that bled hot drops, but he slapped me with his open palm, the sound like a whip in the still air, my head spinning violently, ears ringing with a loud tinnitus that blocked out all sound. I fell to my knees, double vision, and he stood over me, unbuckling his belt with deliberate slowness, the leather whistling as it cut through the air before lashing my exposed back where the dress had torn in the struggle. The first blow landed on my shoulder blades, a crack that left a red whelp that burned like fire, and I screamed, the pain radiating like ripples in a pond. "Don't be noisy, Martina. No one will hear you here," he hissed, coiling the belt for another blow that landed on my buttocks, the leather biting into the flesh through the thin fabric, a burning that made me arch my back and sob. He continued, each lash harder, skin breaking on the fifth, blood trickling down my inner thighs where the dress clung wet. "Count, bitch. Say thank you for each one." "Oh, one. Thank you," I sobbed, voice broken, pain clouding my mind. "2. Thank you. Up to 10. My back a canvas of bloody welts that throbbed with a life of their own. Satisfied, he turned me onto my back on the cold tile floor that smelled of lemon from the morning cleaning, my breasts exposed to the air, nipples hardening from the shock and the cold. His rough hands kneaded my breasts, pinching my nipples until they hardened with pure pain, not pleasure, pulling until hot tears rolled down my temples. "So firm, perfect for biting," he murmured, lowering his head and biting the left one, teeth sinking into the sensitive flesh until it bled, the metallic taste on his tongue as he licked the wound. He forced my legs open, my knees scraping the floor, and thrust 2 fingers into my dry pussy, scraping the inner walls with short but sharp nails. The burning sensation like sandpaper on raw flesh. "So tight. Almost a virgin, but you're not, are you? An app whore," he taunted, adding a 3rd finger, stretching me until I felt a slight tear at the entrance, blood lubricating his forced intrusion. I groaned in pain, my body convulsing, but he pushed deeper, curving his fingers to hit my G-spot with a violence that mixed agony and nausea. He withdrew his fingers, glistening with my treacherous wetness, and positioned his cock at my entrance, the thick tip pressing against my swollen lips. "Feel me fuck you, Martina. You're mine now, bitch. My toy." He thrust in one deep, brutal stroke, the pain blinding as if he were splitting me in two, my pussy resisting but yielding to his strength, ramming with a viciousness that made his balls slam against my ass with my wet fluid. Every movement was a complete violation, my body betraying me with wetness, forced by the constant friction, as I sobbed, nails digging into the floor until they bled. Scream if you want, but this basement is soundproof. No one will hear you down here, he growled, biting my neck until it left bleeding teeth marks, licking the salty blood with his rough tongue. He sped up, his hips slamming into mine with an animalistic rhythm, sweat dripping from his forehead onto my chest, mixing with my tears. So tight, bitch, I'm going to fill you up. He tensed his body, growling, and a hot stream of semen flooded my womb, dripping down my thighs as he withdrew with an obscene pop. He left me there, panting on the floor, but the torment wasn't over. Time to clean you up, bitch. He stood astride my chest, his limp cock dripping white residue, and urinated. The hot yellow stream splashed my breasts, running down my sides in humiliating rivulets, the ammonia smell invading everything, stinging my eyes and nose. I tried to roll over, but the chain caught me. Some of it entered my mouth, open from shock, and I vomited, bile mixing with his urine on my skin, the acidic taste burning my throat. Drink, bitch. It's your new favorite drink, he hissed, directing the stream at my face, soaking my hair in sticky strands, my eyes burning from the salt getting in them, my nose filled with the stench. I spat and touched it, but I swallowed some by accident, the salty liquid going down my esophagus like poison. He laughed, shaking the last drops onto my bruised pussy, the heat splashing my swollen lips. He chained me back to the wall, the metal biting into my wrist, and went upstairs, leaving the door open for a few minutes so the stench could settle in the room. An olfactory reminder of my degradation. That night, I didn't sleep. The cold of the concrete seeped into my bones like frozen knives, the pain in my jaw, hip, and pussy throbbing with every heartbeat, and shame kept me awake, curled up in my own filth. Silent tears wetting the stained mattress. The following days were an endless cycle of terror and survival. At dawn on the second day, the door opened with a metallic squeak, Daniel coming down with a plastic plate, a piece of moldy bread that crumbled into dry crumbs, and a glass of cloudy water with sediment floating in it. Eat, bitch. You need strength for what's coming tonight, he said, his voice casual, as if offering breakfast to a lover. He held it out to me on the floor, but disgust churned my empty stomach, the smell of mold rising like bile. I don't want your food. Let me go home, please. I'll call the police if you let me, but I won't tell them anything about you. His response was a kick to my bruised ribs. The impact was like a hammer, air expelled from my lungs in a muffled groan that left me coughing. I rolled onto my side, gasping, feeling an internal snap that could be a cracked rib, pain radiating like ripples in a disturbed pond. Eat, or I'll starve you until you beg. I took the bread with trembling hands that barely held the piece, chewing the dry bite that tasted of mold and despair, crumbs sticking to my swollen tongue, while hot tears fell onto the plate, diluting the murky water I sipped to avoid dehydration. After eating, he loosened the chain enough for me to stand up, the metal scraping my reddened skin. Take off what's left of your clothes. I want to see you all, naked and broken. Shaking, I tore off the remains of my torn dress and shredded underwear, exposing my body to the stale air of the basement, breasts with incipient bruises that throbbed like heartbeats, a flat belly now tense with fear and hunger, a pussy with trimmed hair that he looked at with ravenous hunger, lips swollen and bruised from the night before. Turn around for me, bitch. Show me that branded ass. I obeyed, turning slowly, feeling his gaze burn my back and buttocks furrowed with red welts that stung in the air, the pain renewed like rekindled embers. He pushed me onto the mattress on my back, the chains clinking like cruel laughter, and knelt between my spread legs. His rough hands kneaded my breasts, pinching nipples hardened by the cold until tears sprang forth, pulling until the skin tightened white and painful. So firm, perfect for biting and breaking, he murmured, lowering his head and biting the left one, teeth sinking into the sensitive flesh until it bled, the metallic taste on his tongue as he licked the open wound like an animal licking its prey. That night, I didn't sleep a wink in the relative darkness of the basement. The cold of the concrete seeped into my bones like icy knives that dug deep and twisted viciously, the pain in my swollen, bruised jaw throbbing with every beat of my rapid, erratic heart, my bruised hip beating like a war drum, and my torn and bleeding pussy throbbing with every shallow breath I took. And shame kept me awake, curled up in my own sticky, humiliating filth cooling on the floor, silent tears wetting the stained mattress, hardened by the dried secretions of previous victims who had lain in the same place of utter, merciless degradation. I thought about my life before that fateful dinner, the apartment with its balcony where I smoked a cigarette at sunset looking at the city lights, laughing with friends in bars with cocktails that tasted like tropical fruits, the job where at least the numbers were predictable. Unlike this chaos of pain and control, dawn came like a mockery, light seeping through the crack in the door, bringing the sound of birds singing outside, oblivious to my hell. On the third day, the routine of terror was consolidated. Daniel came down at noon with a bucket of cold water and a dirty rag, ordering, "Clean yourself up, bitch. I don't want to smell your stench all day." He rubbed my body roughly, the icy water stinging the open wounds on my breasts and pussy, the rough rag scraping like sandpaper on sensitive flesh. "Look how you bleed. So pretty," he commented, running the rag over my swollen clitoris, making me arch in pain. Then he forced me to kneel, the chain tight. "Suck me until I come." I licked his flaccid cock, my tongue tracing salty veins, the taste of skin and stale sweat filling my mouth until he hardened, thrusting deep into my throat. I choked, gagging, but he held my head, fucking my mouth with thrusts that made tears and saliva drip down my chin. "Swallow it all, bitch." He came in my throat, thick semen blocking the air, forcing me to swallow or choke, the bitter taste lingering. The afternoon brought more. He tied my hands to the headboard with rough ropes that cut into my skin as they tightened, leaving red, bleeding grooves. He took out his rolled-up belt and whipped my exposed ass. The first blow landed on my buttocks, a crack that left a red, swollen mark. "Count, bitch. Say thank you for each one that reminds you of your place." "Oh, one." "Thank you," I sobbed, my voice breaking. He continued. Each lash harder and more precise, skin breaking on the fifth, blood trickling down my thighs in warm rivulets. 5. "Thank you." Up to 20. My back a canvas of bloody welts throbbing with a life of their own, the air smelling of blood and leather. Satisfied, he penetrated me from behind, his cock pushing against the open wounds, the pain like blades twisting inside me. He fucked my ass mercilessly, stretching me until I tore, blood lubricating every thrust that made me scream until I was hoarse. "Feel me break you, Martina. You're my whole now." Another day, he brought a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. He forced me to kneel on the floor, the chain tight as a dog collar. "Suck me while I smoke, bitch." I licked his cock, my tongue tracing its veiny length, the taste of salty skin and bitter pre-cum filling my mouth, while he inhaled deeply, smoke filling the stale air with the smell of burnt tobacco. I moaned around his member as it hardened and throbbed, but he smoked down to the filter, ash falling into my hair. "Open your mouth, bitch." I thought he wanted to come, but he pressed the hot ember against my left shoulder. The skin sizzled like meat in a pan, a nauseating smell of charred flesh rising, and I screamed, the pain radiating like lava down my arm. "Mark 1 for you," he said, extinguishing another on my inner thigh, near my pussy, blisters forming instantly with skin bubbles bursting. "Now, swallow my cum as a reward." He thrust deep into my throat, fucking my mouth with brutal thrusts that made me gag, coming in hot spurts that I swallowed out of survival instinct, the thick semen blocking my esophagus. The nights brought worse horrors, a catalog of sadism that broke me piece by piece. Once, he came down with lit candles, the flame dancing in the darkness like an evil spirit. He laid me on the bare, cold floor, my legs forced open, chains tight. "Stay still, bitch. Don't move." The first drop of red wax fell on my right nipple, searing heat solidifying into a white crust that pulled at the sensitive skin. I screamed, my body convulsing on the floor, but he poured more, lines across my breast that hardened into irregular, whimsical patterns covering my sensitive areolas, the heat penetrating like red-hot needles. "Look how they decorate you, Martina, like a living canvas for my art." He dripped it onto my belly, my navel, and then near my clitoris, the heat licking my most intimate skin, causing my labia to contract in agony and tears to roll down my cheeks. As the wax cooled and hardened like a second skin, he fucked me viciously, tearing off pieces with his nails that ripped the scab and exposed reddened, raw flesh underneath. The pain doubled by the pulling. He bit my covered breasts, teeth sinking through the wax into the flesh, blood spurting and mixing with the solidified red. Another torment came with clamps. He tied my hands to the headboard, pulling until the skin tightened, and placed metal clamps on my nipples, the cold, tight bite sending waves of pain. "Pull, bitch." I obeyed, the pain like electricity through my body, nipples stretching until they tore, blood dripping, then hot wax on them, the heat bubbling the blood into red pools. I passed out, waking up with his cock in my mouth, fucking my throat until I vomited, semen and bile mixing on my chin. He forced me to crawl naked through the basement, chained like a dog collar, licking the dirty floor, dust, dried semen, old urine splattered in yellow puddles, while he kicked my ass with his boot. "Good bitch, lick everything like the slave you are." Or he would force me to masturbate in front of him, fingers in my bruised and torn pussy, describing in a broken voice, "I'm wet. It hurts so much. Please stop." He would smoke, extinguishing ashes on my inner thighs, burns accumulating like constellations of pain that stung when touched. One particularly disturbing night, after pouring wax onto my pussy, drops burning my inner lips and clitoris, making me scream hoarsely in a broken voice. He penetrated me with a cold, smooth glass bottle. The wide neck stretched my already torn entrance, tearing tissue with a wet sound, blood lubricating as he pushed deeper, the glass scraping my vaginal walls with each deliberate twist. "Feel how I fill you, bitch, stretching you like a balloon about to burst." He fucked my pussy with the bottle, the cold glass contrasting with the heat of my blood, until I bled profusely, the floor soaked. Then he forced me to lick the bottle clean, my tongue tracing the glass stained with my own blood and hardened wax, the metallic bitter taste making me vomit again. My mind was gradually breaking. Hallucinations of my past life, friends laughing in bars, family at Sunday dinners, mingling with the present. I dreamed of revenge, cutting off his cock with the same knife he used to threaten me, seeing him beg as I did. But I obeyed more, fearing the pain that escalated every day. He noticed, smiling. "You're broken, perfect for me. You don't fight anymore, you just accept." He hung me from the chains once, arms stretched above my head until my shoulders hurt as if they were dislocating, and whipped my back with a coiled electric cable, deep gashes bleeding red rivers down my spine. "Count each one, bitch." 1, 2, up to 50, skin hanging in strips. Then he fucked my dangling ass, gravity amplifying each thrust that made me swing like a pendulum of pain. Another day, he brought electrodes. He tied me to the metal bed, wires attached to my nipples and clitoris with tape that pulled at my skin. "Feel the pleasure, bitch." Low current at first, tingling that hardened my nipples, but he turned up the voltage, my body convulsing in spasms, my pussy contracting in forced orgasms that embarrassed me, urine escaping in uncontrollable spurts from the shock. "Look how you come for me, wet as a fountain." He repeated this until I passed out, waking up with his cock in my mouth, fucking my throat until he came. He made me urinate daily as a ritual, in my mouth to force me to drink the salty stream that burned my throat, in my pussy to clean me after fucking me brutally, the hot liquid splashing my inner lips, in my hair so that it would smell like him permanently, sticky strands stinking of ammonia. The beatings were a daily routine, fists to the stomach that left me breathless and vomiting bile, slaps that swelled my face until one eye closed with a purple eyelid, kicks to the ribs that made me roll on the floor moaning, wax on my clitoris, hot drops bubbling on sensitive skin, making my body arch in agony, painful orgasms that embarrassed me as I came screaming, tweezers on my labia, pulling until they tore, blood dripping as he fucked me. The pain doubled. I thought about suicide, a chain around my neck, but he noticed, taking away the tools. "Don't die, bitch. I need you alive to break you more." Weeks blurred into months, my body a map of scars, burns in sadistic patterns that stung when touched, bruises fading to yellow, pussy permanently swollen. My mind fragmented, dissociating during abuse, floating above watching my broken body. One day, while he slept upstairs exhausted from fucking me until dawn, I searched for the key in his discarded pants, my fingers trembling as I unbuttoned them. I found it, cold in my palm. I opened the basement door with a click that echoed like freedom, crept upstairs, each step agony in my broken body chained to memory. I ran out into the deserted street screaming, "Help! Help!" in a hoarse voice. A neighbor, an elderly man in a bathrobe, called the police, sirens approaching like salvation. Daniel was arrested that night, handcuffed on the floor with blood on his hands from my last blow. The police wrapped me in a blanket, taking me to the hospital where doctors in white coats stitched up my wounds, injected antibiotics, and psychologists listened to my broken testimony. I survived, but the scars, physical, burns healing in irregular patterns, bruises slowly fading into yellow shadows, mental, endless nightmares where I feel his weight, trust shattered with every touch, marked me forever. That innocent date became my personal hell, a reminder that evil lurks in kind smiles and perfect profiles. My name is Luisana, and I will never forget the night my life changed forever. It wasn't a gradual change, nor a slow transformation like the ones you see in movies, where characters evolve through scenes filled with emotional music and profound dialogue. It was a fracture, a before and after so clear that even now I can pinpoint the exact second when everything broke. And it all started with a gesture so common, so everyday, that millions of people do it without thinking twice. I decided to download a dating app on my phone. It wasn't something I did often. In fact, it was my first time. I'd always been skeptical about that kind of digital encounter. They seemed cold and impersonal to me, like buying a person from an online catalog, where you choose based on photos edited with filters and bios that sound too perfect to be real. I preferred organic connections, the kind that happened in a bookstore, a cafe, or at a mutual friend's party, where you could see body language, hear tone of voice, and pick up on subtleties that a screen never conveys. But after a series of disastrous relationships, one with a musician named Pablo, who promised me the world while playing his acoustic guitar in my living room, only to disappear with my credit card and leave me with a debt of 500 pesos in purchases of musical equipment I never saw. Another with a lawyer named Esteban, who made me feel invisible every time he talked to his friends at fancy dinners, interrupting me with comments like, "Luisana doesn't understand law, she's more into books and artistic stuff." I found myself alone, not by choice, but because of an emotional exhaustion that had left me worn out from trying. I was 32 years old, living in a small apartment in the Palermo neighborhood of Buenos Aires, a place with high ceilings and walls painted a creamy white that were now cracking from the winter humidity. My balcony overlooked a tree-lined street where jacaranda trees bloomed in spring with a violet color that always reminded me of the poems of Borges that I read in college. I worked as an editor at an independent publishing house called Ediciones del Sur, specializing in contemporary Latin American literature, where I spent my days reviewing manuscripts in an office overlooking an inner courtyard filled with potted plants struggling to survive the city's smog. My routine was orderly. Wake up at 7, make strong black coffee in my Italian coffee maker that I'd bought at a flea market, check emails while steam fogged up the windows, and then walk 15 minutes to the office, where the smell of old paper and fresh ink greeted me like an old friend. In the evenings, I would come home, cook something simple like a salad of cherry tomatoes and fresh cheese with olive oil, and sit on my worn-out sofa to read a book or watch a series on Netflix until sleep overtook me around 11. It was predictable, safe, but also empty. There was no shared laughter, no one to discuss the ending of a novel with, no human warmth to make cold winter nights feel less lonely. One night, while I was eating dinner alone with a plate of whole wheat noodles cooked al dente, sautéed with garlic, fresh spinach from the market, and a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil that I'd brought back from a trip to Mendoza years ago, and a glass of cheap Malbec red wine I bought at the Chinese supermarket on the corner, a wine with notes of red fruits and a slightly bitter aftertaste that reminded me of family dinners from my childhood. I saw an ad on Instagram while scrolling distractedly on my phone. It was for an app called Alma, with the slogan that read, "Find someone who sees you, not just someone who looks at you." It sounded corny, like those marketing slogans that promise eternal love in 30 characters or less, but also hopeful, as if it recognized that in the modern world, where we are all connected but so alone, what we really long for is to be truly seen. The ad showed smiling couples in idyllic settings, one walking on a beach at sunset with the sun tinging the horizon, orange and pink, another sharing coffee on a terrace overlooking a bustling city, and a third laughing in a park in the rain, umbrellas forgotten to one side. I downloaded the app almost on impulse, as if it were a harmless game, something to pass the time while the noodles cooled on my plate. I created a profile with 3 photos, one of me smiling in a cafe in Palermo, wearing my reading glasses, and with an open book in front of me, the sun filtering through the window and creating patterns of light on the wooden table. Another on the beach in Mar del Plata, with the wind messing up my long, wavy brown hair, wearing a simple navy blue bikini and a genuine smile captured by a friend on a weekend trip. And a third with my 5-year-old niece Martina, hugging me tightly in the park, her blonde curls against my cheek, both of us laughing at a silly joke I no longer remember. My bio was simple but honest. Editor, lover of old books, silence after sex, and conversations that last until dawn. Looking for someone I don't have to pretend to be someone else to fit in with. At first, I didn't expect much. I just wanted to see what would happen, browsing profiles like someone leafing through a catalog of clothes they'll never buy. But the app showed me a series of profiles, and after reviewing them, some too perfect, with gym photos and bleached smiles that looked like they were taken from a toothpaste ad. Others clearly fake, with images stolen from models or minor celebrities, and a few too aggressive, with initial messages that got straight to the point without preamble. I came across one that immediately caught my attention. The man in the photo appeared to be in his 30s, with dark hair combed back, casually but elegantly, bright green eyes that contrasted with his olive skin, and an attractive but unforced smile, as if he were sharing a secret with the camera. He wore an impeccable white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, just enough to reveal a glimpse of his collarbone, and in the background was what looked like a modern office, with shelves full of leather-bound books and a window overlooking a nighttime cityscape, with city lights twinkling like artificial stars. His name was Matteo R., and his profile said he was a successful businessman, owner of a digital strategy consulting firm called Innovatech, with offices in Buenos Aires and Madrid, and that he was looking for someone to share his life with, not just his nights. He mentioned his passions: reading classic Latin American novels by authors such as Garcia Marquez and Borges, traveling to exotic destinations such as the beaches of Tulum or the vineyards of Mendoza, and deep conversations about philosophy and art that lasted until dawn. There were no photos of him in gyms or posing with expensive cars. Instead, there was one of him in an independent bookstore, leafing through a book with a concentrated expression, and another in a Parisian cafe with a cup of espresso in his hand and a melancholic smile. I found it interesting. He didn't use cliched phrases like looking for adventure without commitment or no emotional strings attached. He talked about stability, shared projects, building something real and lasting in a world that felt increasingly ephemeral. I liked him almost without thinking, an impulsive gesture I attributed to the wine I had drunk. He did the same, almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for my response. We started talking that same night. His messages were elegant, well written, without spelling mistakes or unnecessary abbreviations that I detest so much in digital conversations. He asked me about my favorite books. I told him that 100 Years of Solitude had marked me forever, with its magical realism that makes the impossible seem every day, about my work at the publishing house, where I spent hours proofreading manuscripts by emerging authors who dreamed of being the next Cortázar, and why I had chosen to be an editor in a world where physical books seemed to be dying out. He told me that he had studied abroad at the Complutense University of Madrid, where he graduated in business administration with a thesis on the impact of social media on modern marketing, and that he had lived in New York for 3 years, working at an advertising agency in Manhattan, where the frenetic pace of the city had made him appreciate the organized chaos of Buenos Aires. He had returned to be closer to his family, specifically his widowed mother, who lived in an apartment in Recoleta and collected contemporary Argentine art. "I missed the smell of freshly baked bread in the mornings," he wrote in one of his messages, with an eloquence that surprised me. "Here in Palermo, there's a bakery that opens at 6 in the morning, and the aroma seeps through the open windows, mixed with the sound of birds and distant traffic. It's like coming home after a long trip, a reminder that roots are not easily severed." It was poetic. It was human. His words flowed with a naturalness that made the conversation feel like a chat in a cafe, not a digital exchange across a cold screen. He asked me deep, not superficial, questions. Not, "What do you do for fun?" but "What book has changed the way you see the world?" Or, "What is your most treasured childhood memory?" I answered honestly, telling him about my childhood in a humble home, with parents who worked double shifts to pay the bills, and how books had been my escape, my window to worlds where anything was possible. He shared similar anecdotes. He grew up in a middle-class family, with an engineer father who took him to museums on weekends and a literature teacher mother who read him Neruda's poems before bed. After 3 days of constant conversation, messages arriving at all hours, from a good morning with a photo of his breakfast, avocado toast with a poached egg and a perfect latte, to a good night with a quote from a book he had just read, he asked me out on a date. "Would you like to meet me in person?" he wrote, with a simplicity that disarmed me. "We could have a drink at my place. It's quieter than a noisy bar, and I have a terrace with a view of the Buenos Aires sky. We can talk without interruptions, without background music drowning out our words." Normally, I would have said no. Going to someone's house on a first date was a rule I never broke, a lesson learned from friends who'd had bad experiences with men who turned out to be less charming in private. But something in his tone, in the way he wrote, made me feel safe. There was no rush in his messages, no implicit pressure. Just a quiet invitation like that of an old friend who knows that time is not the enemy. Besides, the idea of a terrace overlooking the night sky, with the bustle of the city below as a distant backdrop, sounded romantic. Almost like something out of a novel I would have edited myself. I said yes, with a message I reread 3 times before sending, "I'd love to. When and what time?" We agreed to meet the following Friday at 8 p.m. I spent the week anticipating the encounter, with a mixture of nerves and excitement that I hadn't felt since my college days. I bought a new dress in a store in Palermo, a light cotton one with a floral print in soft shades of blue and green, which made me feel effortlessly feminine. I practiced my makeup in front of the bathroom mirror, opting for a natural look, light foundation to cover the dark circles from sleepless nights, mascara to highlight my brown eyes, and a nude lipstick that wouldn't rub off easily with wine. I waxed my legs with hot wax, put on vanilla-scented lotion, and made sure my hair was impeccable, washed with keratin shampoo that left it soft and shiny. On the night of our date, I dressed in my best dress, an emerald green silk number I had bought for a wedding that never happened, an event canceled by the pandemic that still hurt to remember. I carefully applied my makeup, waterproof mascara to avoid disasters if I cried from laughter or emotion, soft brown eyeliner to define my eyes without hardening them, dark red matte lipstick that lasted for hours without touch-ups, and put on the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me before she died. Small, elegant hoops that caught the light with a subtle shine. I wanted to feel beautiful. I wanted to feel worthy of being seen, not just looked at. I took a taxi. The address Matteo gave me was in Barrio Norte, an elegant neighborhood with old buildings and tree-lined streets that exuded an air of historical sophistication. The taxi stopped in front of a house that looked like something out of a 19th century novel, a gray stone facade with carved details around the edges, tall windows with white lace curtains swaying gently in the breeze, and a solid wooden door with a polished bronze doorknob that reflected the light from the street lamps. The house was imposing, with 3 visible floors and a balcony on the second level adorned with pots of red geraniums that hung like drops of blood against the cold stone. I was surprised to see that the house was much larger than I had imagined. It was not a modern apartment in a tall building, nor a contemporary house with minimalist lines. It was almost a mansion with a small but well-kept front garden, where rose bushes climbed a wrought iron fence and a small fountain bubbled with crystal clear water. The air smelled of night jasmine and the dampness of recently watered earth, a refreshing contrast to the daytime smog of the city. I rang the doorbell, a melodious sound that echoed inside like distant church bells. The door opened instantly with a soft click of the mechanism. It was him, the man in the photo, Matteo. He was wearing the same immaculate white shirt, but with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, well-defined forearms with subtle veins marking his olive skin. His dark hair was slicked back with a touch of gel that made it shine in the hallway light, and his smile was warm and genuine, with a slight dimple on his left cheek that I hadn't noticed in the photos. He smelled of fresh cologne, with notes of citrus and wood, a masculine but not overwhelming scent. "Louisana, you look beautiful," he said in a deep, soft voice that made me shiver slightly, not with fear, but with that nervous anticipation that precedes a kiss. He invited me in with an elegant wave of his hand, as if he were a host at a gala. The foyer was impressive. Gray-veined white marble floors, a dark wood spiral staircase leading upstairs, with a handrail carved with floral motifs that looked handmade, and a crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling, its prisms refracting the light into tiny rainbows that danced on the walls. The walls were decorated with original works of art, dark oil paintings by contemporary Argentine artists, classic portraits in gilded frames that looked like they had been taken from a museum, melancholic landscapes of the Pampas with stormy skies and horses galloping in the distance. And the furniture was Victorian in style, with deep red velvet upholstery and turned legs in mahogany polished to a shine. The air inside was cool, with a subtle scent of lavender coming from a diffuser on a side table, and the silence was broken only by the distant ticking of an antique wall clock in the adjacent living room. "Come in, please," he said, taking my coat carefully and hanging it on a wrought iron coat rack by the door. "Let me offer you a glass of wine. I have a 2015 Malbec that I think you'll like. It's from a boutique winery in Mendoza, with notes of plum and a touch of oak that makes it perfect for a night like this." I accepted the glass of wine with a smile, feeling the cold glass against my fingers. We sat on the sofa in the main living room, a large, soft piece of furniture with gold-embroidered cushions, in front of a fireplace that was unlit but had logs ready to be lit, as if waiting for the perfect moment. The conversation flowed easily, as if we had known each other all our lives. We talked about books. He mentioned that he had read Isabel Allende's The House of the Spirits 3 times, and that each reading revealed new layers of magic and politics and movies. We agreed that Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind was a masterpiece about love and memory, with that train scene that always made me cry. About travel, he told me about his time in Madrid, living in a tiny apartment in Malasaña, where the nights were filled with tapas and conversations in bars with low ceilings and cigarette smoke. He made me laugh with a story about his first trip to New York, when he got lost in the subway during a snowstorm and ended up in the Bronx, asking a group of teenagers for directions. They ended up inviting him to a street basketball game and sharing a hot dog with yellow mustard that he still remembered as the best he had ever tasted. I felt comfortable in his presence, as if the wine and conversation had dispelled the initial doubts I had had about accepting a date at his house. Mateo was attentive, listening to my answers with genuine interest, tilting his head slightly when I talked about my work at the publishing house, asking about emerging authors I had edited, and what the process of transforming a raw manuscript into a polished book ready for bookstores was like. But as the evening wore on, with the clock on the wall striking 9, then 10, I began to notice small details that didn't quite fit with the perfect image he presented. The house was immaculate, yes, with every surface gleaming under the soft light of the floor lamps, but there was a strange lack of personality in the spaces. There were no family photos on the library shelves, no travel mementos such as framed plane tickets or ceramic souvenirs from faraway markets. Not even an open book on the side table with a bookmark in the page, as if someone actually lived there and didn't just use it as a stage. Everything seemed placed there to impress, not to live with on a daily basis. The books on the shelves were arranged by color and size, not by author or genre, as if they were decoration rather than actual reading material. And although Mateo was charming, with that smile that lit up his face every time I laughed, there was something about his behavior that made me nervous, a subtle misalignment. Every time I spoke, his eyes didn't look directly into mine but drifted to my neck, to my hands gesturing as I described a book, to my legs crossed under my dress, as if he were measuring something invisible, evaluating not only my words, but my physical form, my vulnerability. After the third glass of wine, a rich, velvety Malbec that left a taste of ripe berries on the palate, I excused myself to go to the bathroom, feeling slightly dizzy, which I attributed to the alcohol and the accumulated fatigue of an intense week at work. "Of course," said Mateo, gesturing elegantly toward a hallway on the left. "Second door on the right." Upon entering the bathroom, I realized that the decor was completely different from the rest of the house. It was a spacious room with gleaming white tiles on the floor and walls, a porcelain sink on a black marble countertop, and a huge mirror with a gold frame that reflected my image with almost cruel clarity, highlighting the dark circles under my eyes that my makeup had not been able to completely hide. But what left me frozen was not the luxury of the bathroom, but what covered the walls. The walls were covered with photos. They were not artistic portraits or serene landscapes. They were photos of women, dozens, perhaps hundreds, stuck in a chaotic collage that covered every available inch from the ceiling to the baseboard. All the women were young, between 20 and 35 years old, all beautiful in different ways, some with blonde hair and blue eyes, others with dark skin and pronounced curves, others with Asian or indigenous features. But what united them was the expression on their faces: pure terror, absolute resignation, as if they knew they were trapped in something inescapable. And on each one there were cuts in different parts of the body. On the arms with precise lines like surgical incisions. On the legs with patterns that looked like abstract drawings. On the neck with marks reminiscent of invisible necklaces. Some photos showed fresh wounds, with bright red blood dripping, while others had visible stitches, as if they had been repaired after being damaged, with irregular stitches that left visible scars even in the blurry distance of the images. I was paralyzed, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My mind raced in 1,000 directions. Were these real photos? Fake? Part of some macabre art or strange fetish? My stomach churned, and I felt nausea rising in my throat, the wine now bitter in my mouth. I took a step back, stumbling over the edge of the bathroom rug, and my hand braced against the sink to keep from falling. My heart was pounding, a drum in my chest that drowned out all external sounds. I left the bathroom as quickly as I could, closing the door behind me with a barely audible click, as if I feared the women in the photos might come out and chase me. My mind screamed that something was wrong, very wrong, but I tried to remain calm as I returned to the sofa, where Mateo was still sitting, wine glass in hand, and a serene expression on his face. I sat down, crossed my legs in a movement that I hoped would look casual, took a sip of wine, but my hands were shaking so much that the liquid spilled slightly onto my dress, leaving a red stain that spread like blood. I tried to smile, but I felt my face contort into a forced grimace. "Are you okay?" Mateo asked, leaning slightly toward me, his hand brushing my knee in a way that was meant to be comforting but made me instinctively recoil. Yes. I just need some fresh air," I said, standing up with legs that felt like jelly. "Do you have that terrace you were talking about?" "Of course," he said, with a smile that no longer seemed warm to me but expectant, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "This way, let me show you." He led me through a sliding glass door onto a spacious terrace with white wicker furniture and pots of red geraniums hanging from the balcony, perfuming the air with a sweet floral scent. The city spread out below us, its lights twinkling like fallen stars in a sea of darkness, the distant noise of cars and sirens creating an urban symphony that would normally have comforted me, but now felt like a distant warning. But I couldn't enjoy the view. The discovery in the bathroom had left me with a knot in my stomach, and my mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe they were photos from a dark art exhibition, or images from a photography project on gender violence. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. These women weren't actresses. Their expressions were too real, too raw. As I looked out into the night, feeling the cold breeze of Buenos Aires on my skin, I sensed a presence behind me, closer than I expected. I turned around slowly, my heart racing, and I saw the man. But it wasn't the same man who had greeted me at the door. It wasn't Mateo with his white shirt and attractive smile. This man was old, very old. His skin was wrinkled like ancient parchment, furrowed with bluish veins that stood out like dry rivers in a desert. His eyes were sunken and yellowish, like those of a corpse that had been underground too long, and his mouth was a thin, toothless line, curved into a sinister smile that revealed pale, receding gums. He wore a black silk robe, worn at the edges with loose threads hanging like cobwebs, and he smelled of rancid camphor mixed with something metallic, like dried blood or rusty iron. His hair was sparse and white, plastered to his skull like wet cotton, and his hands, stretched out toward me, were bony claws with long yellowed nails that looked as if they hadn't been cut in months. He stared at me with an intensity that froze the blood in my veins, as if his eyes could pierce my skin and see directly into my terrified soul. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice coming out in a broken whisper, backing away until my back touched the cold iron railing of the balcony, which dug into my flesh like a warning. "Oh, my dear," he said in a deep, hoarse voice, as if speaking from the bottom of a dry well, resonating with an echo that did not belong to this world. "I am the owner of this house, and the true owner of that man who invited you here tonight." "Owner? What are you talking about?" I asked, confused, frightened, looking for Mateo, but he wasn't there. The terrace was empty except for the two of us, and the sliding glass door leading back inside had closed silently, as if an invisible hand had sealed it. "That man," said the old man, pointing toward the house with a bony, trembling finger, the yellowed nail pointing like a dagger, "is just a pawn in my game, a toy I use to lure women like you, a collector of fresh souls, if you will." "Women like me? What do you mean?" I asked, feeling the fear in my voice, in my bones, in every cell of my body, as if the air itself had thickened around me, making it difficult to breathe. "Oh dear," he said, approaching slowly, his shuffling steps making the wooden floor of the terrace creak under his bare, veiny feet, each movement deliberate like that of a predator stalking its prey. "You're so naive, so fresh, so full of life. This is my favorite pastime, cutting women up and sewing them back together as if they were my own dolls. I collect them, fix them up, make them perfect in my image. Mateo is just the bait, the hook that brings them here, with his sweet words and promises of eternal love. But once they walk through that door, they're mine." I tried to run, my survival instincts screaming in my mind like an alarm siren. But the old man was faster than his frail appearance suggested. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength for his age, his fingers like iron claws digging into my skin, leaving red marks that burned like fire. He dragged me back into the house, despite my struggles and screams echoing in the empty night, with no one seemingly hearing. He tied me to an antique wooden chair in what appeared to be a private study, a room hidden behind a bookcase that opened with a secret mechanism he activated by pressing a fake book on the shelf. The walls of the room were lined with shelves holding glass jars containing horrendous things. Eyes floating in yellowish liquid, severed fingers with red-painted nails, pieces of skin preserved like rolled-up scrolls, small organs I couldn't identify but made me feel nauseous just looking at them. In the center of the room was a makeshift operating table with worn leather straps and surgical tools arranged on a rusty stainless steel tray, gleaming under the cold light of a surgical lamp hanging from the ceiling. He began to take tools out of a nearby cabinet with slow, ritualistic movements, as if he were preparing for its sacred ceremony. Metal forceps with sharp tips, curved scissors for precise cuts, ebony black surgical needle and thread, and a long, sharp scalpel whose blade reflected the light with an ominous glint that made me blink. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at the tools, recognizing in them not just inert objects, but malevolent intentions, plans for pain and mutilation. The old man moved with a disturbing calm, humming an ancient melody that sounded like a distorted lullaby as he lined up the tools on the tray with obsessive precision. My body shook uncontrollably in the chair, the leather straps cutting off circulation to my wrists and ankles as the old man approached me with the scalpel in his hand, its tip glinting like a promise of agony. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper broken by terror, tears streaming down my cheeks and leaving salty streaks in my smudged makeup. "I just want to play a little, dear," he said with a sinister smile that stretched his wrinkled skin like old parchment, revealing pale, toothless gums. "I want to see what you're like inside, how you bleed, how you break, and then I'll fix you. I'll sew you back together, better than before. You'll be my masterpiece." He began to run the scalpel across my exposed skin, cutting me enough to make me bleed, but not enough to penetrate deeply, as if he were tracing a map on my body with red lines that spread like rivers of fire. Each cut was precise, calculated, accompanied by a whispered comment about the texture of my flesh. The elasticity of my skin, the warmth of my blood dripping onto the dark wooden floor, leaving stains that were quickly absorbed as if the house itself were thirsty. "You're so soft," he murmured, his foul breath brushing my face as he leaned closer, smelling of death and decay. "So perfect. Look how the blood flows, like a river of life escaping. Don't worry, I'll stitch you up soon. You'll be beautiful again." I tried not to scream, biting my lower lip until I tasted the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, just to avoid making a noise that might excite him further. The pain was unbearable, a fire spreading from each cut, radiating to the rest of my body like poison. My muscles contracted involuntarily, my mind screaming for help, but my voice had become a muffled moan, strangled by terror. The old man continued his sadistic game for what seemed like hours, although the clock on the wall showed only 30 minutes. He cut my arms, creating spiral patterns that bled profusely, my legs with crisscrossing lines that formed a web of pain, my neck with superficial marks that made me feel as if I were being strangled by an invisible hand. Then, with a curved surgical needle and thick black thread, he began to sew the wounds, not to heal them, but to create grotesque patterns. Irregular spirals that coiled like snakes. Lines that crossed to form symbols I did not recognize but that looked like ancient runes or marks of possession. Each stitch was a sharp prick, the thread pulling at my skin as if weaving a living fabric, and he commented on each step like an artist proud of his work. "This is how you make a work of art," he said, admiring his work with feverish eyes, the light from the lamp reflecting in his dilated pupils. "First, you destroy the old, the imperfect. Then you rebuild something new, eternal. You will be my favorite, Luisana. Your skin is so delicate, so easy to mold. I don't know how much time passed in that eternity of pain. Minutes stretched into hours, time dissolving into a continuous flow of agony and fear. My mind, in order to escape, took refuge in fragmented memories. The laughter of my niece, Martina, playing in the park, the smell of coffee in my apartment in the mornings, the feel of a new book in my hands, but each cut brought me back to reality, to that room of horrors where the old man played God with my body as his canvas. But then the old man got distracted. A noise in the street, perhaps a car passing by with its engine roaring, perhaps a cat meowing in the darkness, or perhaps the echo of a distant siren in the city that never sleeps, made him turn his head toward the window, his yellowish eyes squinting in the dim light. I saw my chance, a glimmer of hope amid the chaos. With all my remaining strength, I stretched out my right leg, the only part of my body not completely immobilized by the straps, and snatched the scalpel from his limp hand, the cold metal grazing my fingers in a desperate movement. He tried to grab me again, his bony claws reaching out to me like dry branches, but I was faster, driven by pure adrenaline burning through my veins. I plunged the scalpel into his left forearm, right where the vein throbbed beneath the wrinkled skin, sinking the blade to the hilt with a dull sound of flesh tearing. The old man screamed in pain and surprise, a guttural howl that echoed through the room like the cry of a wounded animal, instantly releasing me as his dark blood began to spurt around the embedded blade. I took advantage of the moment of confusion to free myself from the straps that bound me to the chair. My hands were slippery with my own blood and sweat, but I managed to undo the loose knots with trembling fingers, ignoring the burning of the open wounds on my wrists. I ran. My legs, numb from forced immobility, stumbled at first, but my survival instinct propelled me forward. I ran as fast as I could, leaving behind the house the old man slumped on the floor with the scalpel stuck in his arm, shouting curses in a guttural language I didn't recognize. I crossed the hall, knocking over a lamp that crashed onto the marble with a crash of broken glass, and ran out the front door, which, miraculously, was unlocked. I took the stone steps 2 at a time, feeling the cold night air whipping my face, mixing with the hot tears and dried blood on my skin. My emerald green dress was stained dark red, torn at the edges from the struggle, and my bare feet. I had lost one shoe in the room during the fight. The other came off as I ran, were cut by the gravel and glass shards on the street. But the pain was distant, muffled by the adrenaline coursing through my veins like liquid fire. I ran through the dark streets of Barrio Norte, not knowing exactly where I was going, only that I needed to get as far away as possible from that cursed house and that disturbing man I could still hear shouting in the distance, an echo that was fading but resonating in my mind like a curse. My legs trembled as I ran, each step a Herculean effort against exhaustion and shock, but the adrenaline kept me moving, propelling me forward like a wounded animal fleeing a predator. I didn't look back once, not wanting to see if the old man was following me, if he had managed to pull the scalpel from his arm and was limping after me with that sinister smile still on his face. The cold night wind whipped my face, drying the tears running down my cheeks and leaving salty streaks on my skin. My dress clung to my open wounds, the fabric damp with blood still dripping from the cuts on my arms and legs. And my bare feet stepped in puddles of recent rain mixed with street dirt, creating red mud that stuck to the soles of my feet like a second skin. After what seemed like an eternity of blind running, turning down side streets to throw off any possible pursuers, I saw the flashing blue lights of a police station in the distance, a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness of the night. I threw myself toward the officers at the front desk, gasping for breath, my lungs burning, shaking from head to toe as if I had a fever. My voice broken and choked with sobs I couldn't contain. "Help me!" I cried, collapsing against the worn wooden counter, my hands leaving bloody marks on the surface. "Please help me. Someone attacked me. An old man. He cut me." The officers, two uniformed men with expressions of initial alarm that quickly turned to trained professionalism, took me to an interrogation room to take my statement. The room was austere, with peeling cream-colored walls, a cold metal table, and plastic chairs that creaked under my weight. But at that moment, it felt like the safest place in the world. They offered me a thermal blanket to cover my shivering shoulders, a glass of water that I drank with unsteady hands, spilling half of it on the table, and called a medical examiner to examine my injuries. I told them everything from the beginning, how I downloaded the Alma app on a lonely night, how I met Mateo through his elegant messages and captivating stories, how I accepted the date at his house despite my initial reservations, the arrival at the imposing mansion, the fluid conversation on the sofa with Malbec wine, the horrendous discovery in the bathroom with the photos of women cut and sewn, the appearance of the sinister old man on the terrace, his disturbing confession about using Mateo as bait to attract victims, the dragging into the hidden study, the surgical tools lined up like instruments of torture, the precise cuts on my skin that burned like liquid fire, the uneven stitches that created grotesque patterns on my flesh, and finally, the distraction of the noise in the street that allowed me to snatch the scalpel from him and stab him in the arm so I could escape. As I spoke, the words poured out, between sobs and pauses to catch my breath, my voice breaking every time I described a cut or a stitch. The officers furiously took notes in lined notebooks, asking for specific details, the exact address of the house, the physical description of Mateo and the old man, the former with dark hair and green eyes, about 6 feet tall, athletic build, the second with wrinkled skin, yellowish eyes, black robe, smell of death, the name of the app, the messages we had exchanged. I showed them my phone with the conversation still open, my fingers trembling as I swiped the screen. One of them, a gray-haired officer with a trimmed mustache named Ruiz, seemed incredulous at first, his eyebrows arching when I mentioned the photos in the bathroom and the jars with organs. But when I showed them my arms and legs, where the wounds were still bleeding slightly and black threads hung like worms from my skin, his expression changed to one of genuine horror and professional urgency. "My God," Ruiz murmured, leaning in to examine the uneven stitches on my left forearm, where the old man had sewn a spiral that was now oozing a clear liquid mixed with blood. This is crazy. We're going to need photos of all this for the report. The medical examiner, a woman in her 40s with short black hair and thin-rimmed glasses, arrived shortly after carrying a medical kit in a black case. She examined me gently, cleaning each cut with antiseptic that stung like alcohol on an open wound, applying sterile bandages, and noting every detail on an official form. "These stitches are rudimentary," she said in a calm but firm voice, "but effective for closing superficial wounds. Whoever did this had basic suturing skills, probably self-taught. We're going to take samples of the threads for forensic analysis." Meanwhile, a team of officers was sent to the address I gave them, the mansion in Barrio Norte, to investigate. I waited at the station for hours, sitting on a hard chair under fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects, drinking watery coffee from a vending machine that tasted like burnt cardboard, while the wall clock ticked away the minutes with a relentless ticking that seemed to mock my anxiety. Finally, around 4 a.m, Ruiz returned with news. His expression was grave, his uniform wrinkled from the night's work. "We found the house," he said, sitting down across from me with a heavy sigh. "It was empty, no sign of Mateo or the old man, but we confirmed your story. The bathroom is covered with photos, as you described, and in the hidden study we found surgical tools, jars with preserved human remains. It's an active crime scene now. We're processing everything for fingerprints and DNA." I felt relieved but also terrified, knowing that I hadn't imagined it, that it was real made the horror even more tangible. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We're going to take you home," Ruiz said, "and we're going to put surveillance on your apartment for a few days in case they try to contact you. But Luisana, you need therapy. What you went through is not something you can get over on your own." I nodded, exhausted, and let them take me in a patrol car to my apartment. The ride was silent, the streets of Buenos Aires empty at that hour, with only the occasional night taxi passing by like a yellow ghost. When I reached my building, I climbed the stairs with heavy legs, each step echoing in the silence of dawn. I opened the door to my apartment, a small space but my own, with books stacked in every corner, and the familiar smell of ground coffee and lavender from my diffuser. I locked the door, put the security chain on, and collapsed on the sofa, sobbing until there were no more tears left. That night, and many nights after, sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the scalpel approaching my skin, felt the pull of the thread on my wounds, heard the hoarse voice of the old man whispering, "You will be my masterpiece." I installed additional locks, bought an alarm, and began therapy with a psychologist specializing in trauma. But the fear persisted, a constant companion in the shadows of my mind. The police never found Mateo or the old man. The house was searched, but there were no documents, no clues to their real identities. Mateo R. was a fake profile, a decoy created to lure victims like me. The Alma app cooperated with the investigation, but the digital trail led to servers abroad, impossible to trace without international cooperation. And so, my life went on, marked by that night. I no longer download dating apps. I no longer trust charming smiles or poetic words. I learned that monsters don't always have fangs or claws. Sometimes they wear white shirts and offer wine on terraces overlooking the sky. My name is Martin. I am an Argentine living in the United States, and what I am about to tell you is not a story of pride or heroism. It is a confession, a warning, and above all, a testimony. It all began as so many things do in this era, with a slip on a touchscreen that seems harmless but can open doors to unexpected abysses. It was a Friday night in my apartment in Lincoln Park, Chicago, where the wind from Lake Michigan seeped through the cracks in the poorly sealed windows, bringing with it the smell of cold water and the city that never quite sleeps. I was 34 years old, single for over a year, with no children to fill the silence with laughter or tears, and a stable job as a software engineer at a logistics company called Logitech, located in the bustling Loop District. My office was a gray cubicle with a partial view of the Chicago River, where I spent 8 hours a day optimizing algorithms for delivery routes, a job that paid well, enough to cover the $1,500 monthly rent and the occasional indulgence like a weekend at an Airbnb in Wisconsin, but left me mentally exhausted, with my eyes burning from the constant glare of the dual screens and the incessant hum of the servers in the IT room. My routine was a repetitive cycle that was beginning to suffocate me, waking up at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of my alarm clock mimicking birdsong to soften the abrupt awakening, brewing strong black coffee in my drip coffee maker that I had bought on sale on Amazon, checking emails while the aroma of roasted coffee mingled with that of the bakery downstairs that baked fresh bagels every morning, and then taking the L train, the elevated, with its metallic clatter and cars full of commuters with headphones and tired faces, to downtown, where the hustle and bustle of the city engulfed me like an urban wave. Returning home around 7 in the evening, I would cook something simple, like grilled chicken with steamed vegetables, in my compact kitchen with faux granite countertops, or order sushi delivery from a Japanese place in Wicker Park that delivered in less than 30 minutes, and I would sit on my faux leather couch, bought at IKEA during a hurried move, to watch Netflix series like The Office to disconnect from the stress of the day, or play video games like The Legend of Zelda on my Nintendo Switch until exhaustion overtook me around 11, only to repeat the cycle the next day. I hadn't had a girlfriend since Emily, my ex, a freelance graphic designer with dyed red hair and a feather tattoo on her wrist, left me after a heated argument about priorities. She wanted to travel around Europe with no fixed plans. I wanted financial stability and an emergency fund for unforeseen events. And although I didn't consider myself desperate for company, I did feel that physical need, that animal urge that sometimes becomes unbearable when you live alone and the silence of your apartment becomes too dense, like an invisible weight pressing down on your chest on cold winter nights when the wind howls outside and the central heating hums like a constant reminder of your loneliness. It wasn't the first time I had used dating apps. I had had Tinder installed for years, but I used it sporadically, almost like a distracted game to pass the time on the train during my 20-minute commute to work. Or during lunch breaks when I ate a turkey and cheese sandwich in Millennium Park, watching tourists take pictures of the famous bean that reflected the city skyline. My rules were simple and strict, born of past experiences and advice from friends who had had bad dates, profiles with clear, natural photos, without extreme filters that distorted reality, or exaggerated poses in gyms with infinite mirrors, or exotic beaches with photoshopped sunsets. No cliched phrases like looking for no-strings-attached adventures, or living life to the fullest, that smacked of emotional evasion and empty promises. And above all, I never went to someone's house on a first date, always suggesting a busy bar like the Billy Goat Tavern, with its noisy atmosphere and legendary cheesesteaks, a cafe with outdoor seating in Lincoln Park where the smell of freshly ground coffee mingled with that of spring flowers, or a public park like Grant Park where people were constantly walking dogs or jogging. So I would have implicit witnesses and an easy way out if things didn't flow, or if I detected any red flags such as obvious lies or controlling behavior. But that Friday night, after a frugal dinner of instant ramen noodles with frozen vegetables sautéed in a non-stick pan that had seen better days and was starting to stick to the bottom, and a local craft beer I bought at the Whole Foods supermarket on the corner, an IPA with citrus notes of grapefruit and hops that I liked because it reminded me of nights out with friends at the bars in Wrigleyville before a Cubs game, I opened Tinder almost out of boredom. The apartment was silent, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator that needed repair, and the distant traffic on Lakeshore Drive, where cars passed like rivers of lights in the night. I scrolled through profiles distractedly, rejecting most with a quick swipe left. A guy with photos only of his tattooed muscular torso, posing in a gym with mirrors reflecting infinite clones of himself. Another with a bio that said, "If you're not into fitness, swipe left," accompanied by selfies in the mirror showing off his six-pack abs. A woman with selfies in the bathroom with dog ear and cat nose filters that looked childish. A few that were too aggressive, with opening messages like, "You're cute, when can we meet?" without even a hello. Nothing really caught my interest, nothing that made me pause and read the entire bio. Her profile appeared near the end of the session, as if the app had saved her for last, a playful algorithm that knew how to hold my attention. Her name was Valentina, or at least that's what the name in bold above the main photo said. The image showed a girl with wavy brown hair cascading over her slender shoulders, with large, expressive eyes of a warm brown that seemed to invite deep and sincere conversation, and a shy smile that wasn't the typical seductive pose of many Tinder profiles, but something more genuine, almost vulnerable, as if she were sharing a secret with the camera rather than posing to impress. She wore a simple white blouse with a subtle V-neck that revealed a delicate pearl necklace hanging delicately over her collarbone, adding a touch of elegance without ostentation. She looked young, yes, but not unusually so. She could be 20, 22, I thought, based on the freshness of her clear skin and the absence of wrinkles around her eyes or on her forehead. Her bio was brief but intriguing. Art student in college, discreet and dreamy, seeking sincere companionship, someone to talk to about everything and nothing without judgment. There were no exaggerated emojis or hashtags like "Der Adventure Seeker" or "Des No Pressure" that plagued other profiles. It was simple, almost poetic in its brevity, evoking images of quiet nights with deep conversations rather than loud parties or fleeting adventures. I liked it without thinking too much about it, an impulsive gesture that I attributed to the beer I had drunk, relaxing my usual inhibitions and making scrolling feel more like a fun game than a serious search. To my surprise, the match was immediate, as if she had been waiting for my like in real time, the Tinder icon vibrating on my screen with a cheerful sound. "It's a match," she wrote first, just a few seconds later, as if she had been prepared for the moment. "Hi. I liked your profile. You seem like a real person in a sea of fake poses. Would you like to meet up? I can host at my place. It's quieter than a noisy bar, and we can chat without interruptions or distractions." Normally, I would have said no immediately, my golden rule screaming in my mind like an internal alarm. Going to someone's house on a first date was a line I never crossed, a lesson learned from stories of friends who had ended up in awkward situations such as dates that turned aggressive or discoveries of lies that put personal safety at risk. I always preferred public, neutral places where I could assess the situation without committing to a private space, but something in his message, in that shy smile in the photo that seemed genuine and not calculated, made me let my guard down for a moment, doubting my strict rules. Maybe it was the loneliness that had built up over months without intimate contact, the empty echo of my apartment amplifying every negative thought. Or perhaps the way he wrote, "Get to know each other," as if it implied something deeper than a casual encounter, a real connection in a world of superficial interactions. I responded cautiously, testing the waters with a counter-offer to maintain control. "Hi, Valentina. Thanks for the compliment. Your profile caught my attention too. It seems we have common interests in art and deep conversations. Are you sure about your place? We can have a drink at a bar near you, something neutral to start with and break the ice." She insisted almost immediately, as if she had anticipated my reservation and had a response ready. "I really prefer at home. I live with my family, but they go to bed early and respect my privacy completely. We'll be alone, but in a comfortable and relaxed environment. I promise I don't bite." Besides, I have some Argentine wine that I want to share with someone who appreciates good conversation. And in a bar, the noise always interrupts. That phrase, "I live with my family," reassured me a little more than it should have. I thought she was a young woman, perhaps still living with her parents for financial or cultural reasons, from a conservative neighborhood where going out at night wasn't that common or safe for a woman alone, and who didn't feel comfortable in noisy bars full of drunk strangers and loud music. The playful emoji at the end added a light, non-aggressive touch, as if she were joking to ease the tension. I told myself it was just a date, that I could go, assess the situation in person, and leave if something didn't feel right, or if I detected inconsistencies in her story. To be extra cautious, I texted my younger brother Alex, going on a date with a girl from Tinder. Address, the one she sent me in Inglewood. If I don't text you in 2 hours, call someone or go check on me. He replied with a laughing emoji and a casual text. Relax, paranoid. Have fun and use protection. I replied to Valentina. Okay, you've convinced me with the Argentine wine. What time? And can you confirm the address? She gave me the address via WhatsApp, a house in the Englewood neighborhood, an area known for its socioeconomic contrasts, with quiet residential streets, but also crime and poverty issues that made people cautious about walking at night. It wasn't the safest neighborhood in Chicago. I'd heard stories of shootings and robberies on the local news, but it wasn't the worst either. I thought it was understandable for a student on a limited budget living with her family. I prepared for my outing carefully, as if I were planning a strategic operation rather than a casual date. I showered with sandalwood soap that left a masculine but subtle scent on my skin, shaved my stubble to look clean and trustworthy, and chose casual but neat clothes, dark jeans that were tight but not too tight, making me feel comfortable, a navy blue button-down shirt that highlighted my gray eyes and fair complexion, and a light black leather jacket that gave me a touch of confidence without seeming pretentious or intimidating. I put on cologne with notes of fresh bergamot and smoky vetiver, enough to be noticed up close but not overwhelming from afar, and checked my wallet. Condoms, just in case, although I wasn't planning anything rash and always prioritized consent. Enough cash for a taxi back if I needed to leave quickly or pay for an emergency drink, and my phone with a full battery, portable charger in my pocket just in case. I took an Uber, so I wouldn't have to worry about parking in an unfamiliar neighborhood, and during the 20-minute ride from Lincoln Park to Inglewood, I reviewed our Tinder conversation once more, looking for any red flags I might have overlooked in my initial enthusiasm. Everything seemed normal, chats about books. We both loved Haruki Murakami and his surreal worlds where reality merges with the dreamlike. Movies. We agreed that Inception was a masterpiece about dreams and reality, with that train scene that always made me question my own perception. And personal dreams. She wanted to be a digital artist, creating illustrations for video games. I wanted to travel more in Europe, specifically to Spain, to see Gaudi's architecture in Barcelona. Nothing suspicious, nothing that indicated danger or falsehood. The Uber driver, a middle-aged man with an Indian accent and a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror, chatted with me about Chicago's unstable weather. One day sun, the next rain, just like life, right? And dropped me off in front of the house with a, "Be careful, this neighborhood isn't the best at night." The house was on a quiet residential street but had a subtle air of neglect. Tall trees with branches stretching like skeletal fingers over the cracked sidewalk. Clean sidewalks but with weeds growing in the cracks. And porch lights off in most of the neighboring houses, creating a corridor of darkness, interrupted only by municipal streetlights casting a sickly orange glow. It was a modest red brick house with a low, rusty gate that creaked when I pushed it open, and a wooden door painted blue. Faded by the sun and the city's constant rain, the front lights were off, but a faint yellowish glow could be seen in a first-floor window, filtering through thin, yellowed curtains that swayed slightly in the Chicago night wind, laden with the smell of wet asphalt after a recent rain and the distant smoke from chimneys in nearby houses. I rang the doorbell, a shrill metallic sound that echoed in the silence of the street, where only the distant barking of a stray dog and the purr of a car passing in the distance on a parallel avenue could be heard. The door opened instantly, with a creak of hinges that needed oil and a smell of stale air that hit me like a slap in the face. And there she was. But she wasn't like the photo on Tinder. The image on the app had made her look more mature, more confident, with strategic lighting that softened her features. In person, she was small, very small. Not in stature, although she was about 5'3" with low, faux leather heels that tried unsuccessfully to add a few inches, but in physical and emotional presence. She had the face of a teenager, with rounded cheeks that still retained the softness of childhood, eyes too big for her face that looked with a mixture of nervousness and forced resignation, and small, thin hands that twisted in front of her body as if she didn't know what to do with them, or as if she were holding back a constant tremor. She wore a short black skirt that reached mid-thigh, revealing thin, pale legs with subtle veins visible under translucent skin, and a tight red t-shirt that looked borrowed from someone older, too adult for her fragile, slender frame, accentuating curves that were just beginning to develop and making her look like a child playing at being an adult. Her makeup was clumsy, with red lipstick smudged at the corners of her mouth, and blue eyeshadow that made her look even younger, like a teenager experimenting with her mother's makeup for the first time. "Hello," she said, in a high-pitched, almost childlike voice that trembled slightly on the open vowels, as if she were forcing the words through a lump in her throat. "Come in, please. Don't stand in the doorway. It's cold outside." I entered, closing the door behind me with a click that sounded too final in the oppressive silence of the house, as if I were sealing my own fate. The interior was tidy but impersonal, as if no one really lived there, or as if everything had been hastily arranged for an inspection. There were no family photos on the bare walls, painted a beige, faded by time and humidity. No toys scattered on the floor to indicate children in the house, no books piled on side tables with bookmarks sticking out, not even a pair of shoes thrown in the entryway to suggest everyday life and normal chaos. Just basic, functional furniture. A worn gray fabric sofa with cushions sagging from repeated use and indefinite stains on the arms. A white plastic table with burn marks from cigarettes on the edges that smelled of stale tobacco when I approached. An old flat-screen TV mounted on the wall that was turned off, reflecting our distorted image like a funhouse mirror, and a floor lamp with a yellowed bulb that cast long, elongated shadows on the linoleum floor, scratched and faded from years of foot traffic. It smelled of artificial pine-scented floor cleaner, but underneath that was a strange sweetness, like cheap air freshener mixed with something stale that I couldn't identify. Perhaps cigarette smoke impregnated in the yellowed curtains, or moisture accumulated in the walls that seeped into the air like a rotten secret. "Sit down," she said, pointing to the sofa with a nervous, quick gesture, as if she were reciting a memorized script and afraid of forgetting the next line. "Would you like something to drink? I have water, or soda. No alcohol. I'm sorry, my family doesn't allow it." "Water is fine," I replied, uncomfortable from the start. Sitting on the edge of the sofa, as if ready to get up at any second, my knees touching the coffee table and feeling the rough fabric of the sofa against my jeans, a material that itched slightly and made me shift restlessly. She brought me a glass of water in a glass with condensation running down the sides, as if she had taken it straight from the tap without cooling it in the refrigerator, the water warm and with a slight taste of chlorine that made me wrinkle my nose. She sat across from me on a hard wooden chair that creaked under her light weight like a dry leaf, her legs together and pressed tightly, her hands in her lap, twisting her fingers into an anxious knot that revealed her underlying nervousness. "And," she asked with a forced smile that didn't reach her large eyes, revealing small, slightly crooked teeth that hadn't been aligned with braces, a detail that added to her youthful appearance. "And what?" I said, trying to sound casual and lighthearted, but my mind was already on high alert, processing the details that didn't fit the image of a normal date. Her childish voice that trembled, her inappropriate clothes that looked borrowed or chosen for a role that didn't belong to her, the oppressive silence of the house that seemed empty but charged with an invisible presence, as if the walls themselves were listening to our conversation. "Well," she said, looking down at the floor, where an indefinite stain on the linoleum caught her attention for a second, a nervous distraction that made her seem even more vulnerable. "Didn't you want to be with me? Like we talked about on the app, I can do whatever you want." The sentence hit me like a punch in the stomach, confirming my worst suspicions that had begun to form from the moment she opened the door, and I saw her childish face. The air thickened around me, and I felt cold sweat beating on my forehead, my heart racing as if I were in a race I hadn't asked for. That's when I knew, for sure, a realization that froze the blood in my veins. This wasn't a romantic date. It was a paid service, a cold, calculated transaction, and she wasn't a grown woman. She was a child. She had to be 15 at most. Her makeup clumsily applied with red lipstick that smudged at the corners of her mouth as if she didn't know how to apply it properly, and blue eyeshadow that made her look like a teenager secretly experimenting with her mother's makeup for the first time. Couldn't hide the soft roundness of her cheeks that still retained the plumpness of childhood, the complete absence of wrinkles or expression lines, the raw vulnerability in her hunched posture as if she wanted to make herself small and invisible. My stomach churned violently, nausea rising in my throat like bitter acidic bile, burning everything in its path. I felt cold sweat soaking my shirt under my jacket, and my hands clenched into involuntary fists on my knees, my knuckles whitening from the force. "How old are you really?" I asked, my voice coming out harsher and more accusatory than I intended, laden with a mixture of horror, anger, and a premature guilt that was already beginning to take root in my chest. She shrugged, a small defeated movement that caused her t-shirt to slip slightly off one slender shoulder, revealing a strip of childish white bra with a pink floral pattern that did not belong to an adult. 18, she said, but her voice trembled like a leaf in an autumn gust of wind, and her eyes darted toward the dark hallway behind her, as if she expected, or feared, someone to emerge from the shadows at any moment to punish her for the truth. "Don't lie," I insisted, rising slowly, so as not to frighten her more than she already was, even though my heart was pounding in my chest like a war drum echoing in my ears. "This is wrong. Very wrong. You shouldn't be here, and you shouldn't be doing this." That's when I heard the footsteps for the first time. Slow, heavy, deliberate footsteps. Climbing an internal staircase I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a half-open door at the back of the living room, painted the same faded beige as the walls to blend in. Each step echoed on the old creaky wooden floor, a thud-thud-thud, approaching with the inevitability of an executioner, sending vibrations through the floor that I could feel under my shoes. The girl, because that's what she was, a girl, not a woman, turned visibly pale, her face losing all color, as if the blood had drained from her skin in an instant, leaving only a pale mask of utter terror. She stared down the hallway with an expression of pure panic, her eyes widening until the whites around her brown irises were visible like full moons, and her hands clenched in her lap until her knuckles turned white, her nails digging into her palms. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of approaching footsteps, a desperate plea that froze the blood in my veins and made my throat tighten. "Don't say anything. Just do what you came here to do. If he gets angrier, it will be worse for me." The world stopped in that moment, time suspended in a void of horrible understanding that hit me like a speeding truck. She wasn't just a minor, she was a victim. Exploited, forced, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. And those footsteps, Those footsteps belonged to her captor, someone who controlled her with authority and violence. "Everything okay, Valentina?" said a male voice from the hallway, deep and authoritative, with a rough accent that spoke of years of cigarettes and cheap whiskey, a tone that brooked no disobedience or questioning, like that of a gang leader or an abusive father accustomed to giving orders. "Yes, Dad," she replied, her voice no longer that of a frightened child, but that of a puppet reciting lines learned by heart under threat, forced and mechanical, her body tensing like a spring about to snap. "Everything's fine. We're talking about art and movies. Dad." The word fell like a bomb in my mind, exploding everything I thought I understood about the situation, shattering my reality into sharp pieces that dug into my conscience. The man was not a stranger, an unknown pimp hired or a partner in crime. He was her father. Her own father was exploiting her, selling her body to strangers like me through a dating app, turning her home into a makeshift brothel where innocence was monetized like cheap merchandise. Horror washed over me like a cold, dark wave, freezing my muscles, my breathing, my rational thought. I felt a lump in my throat that prevented me from speaking, and my vision clouded for a moment with tears of rage and disbelief that I couldn't allow myself to shed at that moment. A man appeared in the doorway of the living room, blocking the dim light from the hallway with his imposing and menacing silhouette, like a living shadow absorbing the light around him. He was tall, easily 6 feet tall in his 50s, with gray hair cut short like a retired military man or an ex-convict, and a short-sleeved shirt unbuttoned at the chest, revealing a stocky torso covered with gray hair and tattoos faded by time. An American eagle on one arm, with wings spread as if about to attack, and a smiling skull on the other, with empty eyes that seemed to stare directly at me. Perhaps memories of a past in the army, in Chicago street gangs, or in prison. His face was angular, with a square jaw marked by small scars from old acne or past fights, and dark, almost black eyes that scanned me like an airport security scanner, assessing whether I was a potential threat or just another customer in a long list of nighttime transactions. He had a calm, almost bored expression, as if this were a routine transaction in a family business he had run for years, not an act of utter depravity that destroyed his own daughter's innocence. $50, he said, extending a calloused hand stained with black grease, probably from some daytime manual labor he used as a cover for his nighttime activities. His thick sausage-like fingers waiting impatiently for payment. I didn't argue. I didn't want to provoke a confrontation that could endanger the girl, Valentina if that was her real name, or just an alias for the app, or escalate the situation to physical violence. I took out my wallet with trembling hands that I tried to steady, counted out a $100 bill, the largest I had in cash, crumpled at the bottom of my pocket, and handed it to her, avoiding touching her rough, hot skin as if contact would contaminate me. "Keep the change," I said, my voice coming out hoarse and broken, as if the words were stuck in my throat dry with fear and revulsion. He took the bill without even looking at it, folded it with military precision, and slipped it into the front pocket of his worn, oil-stained jeans, nodding approvingly as if it were a fair deal in a barter market. "Good," he said, turning to the girl with a look that made her shrink into her seat like a cornered animal, her shoulders slumping and her head bowing in submission. "Behave yourself, baby. I don't want any complaints later, or you know what happens." He walked down the aisle, his heavy footsteps echoing on the floor like a court sentence, leaving a trail of stale sweat and cheap cologne that lingered in the air like an invisible threat. Valentina looked at me, her large eyes filled with a mixture of temporary relief and deep resignation, as if she knew this was only a momentary respite in a life of constant and repeated horrors. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last syllable. For not getting angry or demanding anything. They're not like you." I couldn't respond immediately. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, horror at what I had just witnessed. Anger toward this man who exploited his own daughter as if she were disposable merchandise, guilt for having responded to the profile in the first place and for almost falling into the trap, and a growing determination to do something, anything, to get her out of there. I sat down next to her on the sofa, keeping a respectful distance so as not to invade her already violated personal space, and took a deep breath to calm my racing pulse. "How old are you really?" I asked again, my voice soft but insistent, wanting to confirm what I already suspected in order to build a solid mental case. 14, she finally admitted, lowering her head as if the truth were a weight crushing her, her shoulders slumping even further and her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'll be 15 in 2 months, but he makes me say 18 on the profiles. He says if I tell the truth, no one will come." 14. My God. 14 years old, forced to pose as an adult on a dating app, to chat with strangers, to welcome them into her own home under her father's watchful eye. The horror deepened, a bottomless pit in my stomach that made me feel nauseous. 12 years old when it started, according to what she would later mention. 12 years old when most girls play with dolls or dream of being princesses. She was forced to sell her body by a father who should have protected her, not exploited her as an economic resource. "And he, your father, forces you to do this?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer from her defeated expression. I needed to hear it from her mouth to confirm it, so that there would be no doubt in my mind, and I could act with conviction. She nodded slowly, silent tears running down her cheeks, leaving streaks in her smudged makeup that now looked like a tragic mask. "Since I was 12, she whispered, her voice a barely audible thread that broke with every word, as if reliving it broke her all over again. "He says it's to pay the house debts, the bills, the food, that Mom left us when we were little, and we have to survive somehow. But I know it's not just that. He likes absolute control. He likes the easy money that comes in without effort. And if I resist or say no, he beats me with his belt until I bleed, or worse, locks me in the basement without food for days." 12 years old. The number echoed in my head like an accusing echo. 12 years old, forced to sell her body, to feign desire where there was only fear, to smile for cameras that captured her stolen innocence. "Are there more?" I asked, remembering her Tinder bio, the plural implied in some messages that now took on a sinister meaning, and feeling a chill as I imagined that I was not the only victim in that house of horrors disguised as a family home. She hesitated for a moment, glancing down the dark hallway, as if afraid her father would return at any second, her ears attuned by years of constant surveillance. "My sisters," she finally said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper barely audible above the distant hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen. 13-year-old Lucia and 12-year-old Camilla. He forces them to have profiles on the app too. We change names and photos so we won't be detected by the moderators. If one app blocks us due to reports, we create new accounts on another. Sometimes he makes us work together if the client asks for something special. 3 girls, 3 innocent victims, all living under the same roof, exploited by their own father, as if they were merchandise on an underground black market, their childhood stolen and turned into a source of illicit income. I couldn't stay silent about that. I couldn't just walk away and pretend I hadn't seen anything, that I hadn't heard his confession. My mind, trained by years of solving logical problems in code, began to formulate a plan step by step, like an algorithm for escaping a maze. "I'm going to help you," I said, taking her hand gently, feeling how cold and trembling it was under my warm palm, as if fear had frozen her inside. "You and your sisters. But I need you to help me too. Can you give me details? Full names, how exactly he operates, phone numbers he uses, anything I can use to report him and make sure the police take it seriously." She looked at me with eyes wide and shiny from unshed tears, a mixture of fragile hope and deep terror, as if she couldn't believe that someone was finally listening to her, offering real help instead of demands. "His name is Roberto Guzman," she said, her voice gaining a little strength with each word, as if verbalizing it freed her from a weight. "He works as a mechanic at a shop called Auto Fix in Inglewood during the day, fixing old cars and stealing parts when he can to sell on the black market. At night, this. He uses different names on the apps: Mateo, Lucas, Diego, whatever sounds attractive. He changes the photos using editing apps so we won't be recognized, but he always uses our real ones for the profiles. He forces us to chat from our phones, to respond to messages at any time, even if we're at school, if we don't do it right, or if a customer complains. He punishes us by taking away our food or hitting us with his belt in places where it can't be seen, like our backs or legs. I took detailed mental notes, recording every word in my memory as if they were lines of code in a critical program, repeating them in my head so I wouldn't forget anything. The father's name, the Auto Fix workshop in Inglewood, the aliases in the apps, the methods of punishment. I asked her for alternative addresses where she could operate, secondary phone numbers she used to coordinate with clients, any patterns in the encounters, specific days, preferred times that could help the police mount an effective operation. As we spoke in conspiratorial whispers, the yellowish light from the lamp casting dancing shadows on the beige walls, I heard footsteps again, this time coming down the stairs with the same deliberate heaviness, as if the father were patrolling his territory to make sure everything was under control. Valentina tensed immediately, her hand squeezing mine with desperate force, her nails digging into my palm without her realizing it. "It's him," she whispered, her voice a thread of panic. "He's coming to check that everything is okay. Please act normal." I acted quickly, gently letting go of her hand so as not to alert him, and stood up, pretending to have a casual, light conversation to cover up. "And so, what exactly are you studying at university? Digital art, right? Sounds fascinating. I always wanted to learn how to use Photoshop for more than just editing vacation photos," I said aloud, in a conversational tone that I hoped sounded natural, just as Roberto entered the living room, his imposing silhouette filling the doorway. He looked at us, his dark eyes scanning the scene with trained suspicion, like a prison guard checking a cell for contraband. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his deep voice laden with an implicit threat disguised as paternal concern, crossing his arms over his broad chest to emphasize his commanding presence. "Yes, Dad," Valentina said, letting go of my hand and forcing a smile that looked like a distorted grimace of pain, her body tensing like a spring about to snap under pressure. "Martin is very nice. We're talking about art and movies, like I told you. Nothing else." Roberto nodded slowly but didn't move right away. He stood there, arms crossed in the doorway, watching us with that calm but watchful expression, as if waiting for a mistake, a verbal slip, or a nervous gesture that would give him an excuse to intervene and take control of the situation. I felt trapped in an invisible cage, but I remained outwardly calm, smiling falsely and continuing the fictitious conversation to dispel any suspicion. "Yes, Valentina was telling me about her graphic design classes. It sounds like an exciting field, especially with all the digital tools available today. I work in software, so I understand a little bit about that," I said, forcing a light laugh that sounded hollow even to my ears. Roberto stared at us for a few more seconds, his dark eyes moving between us like a radar detecting lies, before grunting a "fine" and turning away, climbing the stairs again with heavy footsteps that echoed like warnings. Valentina exhaled a sigh of relief as his footsteps faded, her body relaxing slightly, though fear still lingered in her eyes like a permanent shadow. "Thank you," she whispered. "If he realizes that we're not doing anything, he gets angry. He thinks I'm wasting time and money." I couldn't imagine the daily hell she lived in. Her own father, the man who should protect her from the monsters of the world, was the monster himself, turning her home into a prison where every interaction was a transaction, every smile a mask for survival. I needed more details to help her effectively. I asked her about her sisters, how he forced them, if there were patterns in the clients, if he had allies, or if he operated alone. She told me, in broken whispers, that Roberto had started with her when their mother left them 3 years ago, fleeing his verbal and physical abuse, leaving the 3 girls at his mercy. At first, it was just photos online for dubious sites, but then it escalated to actual dates when the money from the photos wasn't enough to cover his gambling and alcohol debts. He used apps like Tinder, Bumble, and even darker sites on the dark web to attract clients, forcing the girls to chat from prepaid phones he bought at convenience stores. If a client complained or didn't pay, he punished them with beatings or deprivation, such as not eating for days or locking them in the damp, dark basement where the smell of mold and rats was constant. "We have to get you out of here," I said, my voice firm with determination. "You and your sisters. But I can't do it alone. I need solid evidence for the police. Can you give me something? Photos, messages, anything that proves what's going on?" She nodded, getting up carefully so as not to make any noise, and went to her room upstairs, returning with an old phone hidden under her mattress. She showed me text messages with her father, explicit instructions on what to say to clients, photos he forced her to send, and even receipts for cash payments that he recorded in a simple accounting app. I copied everything onto my phone, taking photos of the screen for backups. "Now, I need you to trust me," I said. "I'm going to leave, but I'll come back with help. Stay safe until then." She looked at me with eyes full of hope for the first time that night. "Please hurry," she whispered. "I don't know how much longer we can hold out." I left the house, feeling her eyes on my back until I closed the gate behind me. The cold night air hit me like a refreshing slap, clearing my mind clouded by adrenaline. In the Uber back to Lincoln Park, my mind was a whirlwind of plans and fears. I couldn't go to the police with only suspicions and screenshots. I needed irrefutable evidence so they would act quickly and not put the girls at risk with a slow investigation. But I couldn't leave them alone in that house for another night, knowing that every minute was a potential danger. When I got to my apartment, a one-room space with a kitchenette and a small balcony where I grew herbs like basil and mint for my home-cooked meals, I sat down at my wooden desk from the supermarket and began to meticulously document everything. Screenshots of the Tinder conversation with timestamps, the exact address in Englewood, detailed descriptions of Valentina and Roberto based on what I had seen. Him with specific tattoos, her with a small scar on her left wrist that she mentioned was from an accident with her father, the text messages she showed me, and even a voice recording I secretly made with my phone during our conversation capturing her confession in crystal clear audio. I searched online for child exploitation and trafficking in Chicago, finding hotline numbers for anonymous reporting operated by organizations such as the National Human Trafficking Hotline and the Chicago Police Department's Special Victims Unit. I called the hotline first, and a calm, professional female voice listened to me for 40 minutes, asking precise questions about ages, descriptions, methods of operation, and advised me to contact the federal police immediately, as this could involve larger trafficking networks crossing state or even international borders. On the third day, with all the evidence compiled in a secure digital folder on my Google Drive, I went to the Central Police Station in Chicago's Loop. The building was a gray concrete monolith with American flags flying at the entrance, and the interior smelled of stale coffee and old paper, with uniformed officers passing by with folders under their arms and radios crackling with police codes. I told the assigned detective everything, a man in his mid-40s named Ramirez, with a gray mustache and tired eyes that had seen too much in his years of service. I showed him the screenshots, played the voice recording, described the house and the modus operandi. They were skeptical at first, with Ramirez raising an eyebrow when I mentioned that the father used his own daughters. But when I showed them the photos Valentina had allowed me to take of her hidden bruises and Roberto's written instructions, their expression changed to one of professional urgency. "This is serious," Ramirez said, furiously taking notes in his yellowed notebook. "If this is true, we're talking about child trafficking, child sexual exploitation, possibly with elements of physical and psychological abuse. We need to act quickly but carefully so as not to put the victims at risk." They agreed to set up a covert operation based on my information. They gave me a new phone with a hidden microphone and built-in GPS for real-time tracking, and told me what to say and how to act so as not to arouse suspicion. The plan was simple but effective. Contact the fake profile again, feign interest in another girl to confirm the operation, and use an undercover agent as a client to infiltrate and gather evidence on site before a raid. I wrote to Valentina's profile again from a new account I created with the help of the police so as not to alert Roberto. "Hi, I really enjoyed our date with Valentina. How about we meet again? This time I can pay more for something special." The reply did not come from Valentina, but from a different number, probably Roberto's disguised. "Valentina is not available, but I have another girl. Very similar, younger if you want. Interested? Address, 14 Eternity, San Martin Street, apartment 3B, $100 an hour." It was a trap, or a golden opportunity. The police confirmed that the address was an apartment in a multi-family building in Englewood, probably a second location Roberto used to avoid suspicion at his main home. I went with the police that same night. We parked 2 blocks away in an unmarked van with tinted windows, where a team of 4 plainclothes officers, 2 men and 2 women wearing bulletproof vests under casual clothes, prepared for the raid. I stayed in the van, wearing an earpiece connected to the microphone of the undercover agent, a young officer named Torres, who looked enough like me to pass for a typical customer. Jeans, black t-shirt, leather jacket, and a look of feigned nervousness that sold the story. Torres rang the doorbell of apartment 3B, a buzzing sound that echoed in the hallway of the old building, which smelled of dampness and fried food. A woman's voice answered through the intercom, distorted but clear. "Yes? Who is it?" "It's Martin. I came to see the girl. I spoke to Roberto." Silence for a few seconds. Then the click of the door opening. "Come up," said the voice, resigned. The officers entered stealthily. Torres first with a hidden camera in his jacket recording everything. The others following him at a distance so as not to alert anyone. What I heard through the earpiece was like a nightmare come true. A live audio feed of a horror unfolding in real time. Torres entered the apartment, a small, cluttered unit with walls yellowed by cigarette smoke and cheap second-hand furniture. Roberto was there, sitting on a worn-out sofa with a beer in his hand, flanked by a woman in her 40s with platinum blonde dyed hair and an expression hardened by years of hard living, probably an accomplice or partner. "Welcome," said Roberto, standing up with a fake smile that didn't reach his dark eyes. "The girl is ready. $100 up front, as agreed. No rough stuff, or I'll kick you out." Torres handed over the money marked by the police, bills with tracked serial numbers, and Roberto quickly counted it before putting it in his pocket. "Lucia," Roberto called toward a closed door at the back. "Your client is here." The door opened, and a 13-year-old girl came out dressed in clothes similar to Valentina's, a short skirt, a tight t-shirt, clumsy makeup that did not hide her real age. Her eyes were glassy, probably drugged to keep her docile. At that moment, Torres gave the signal. "Police, hands up!" "Nobody move!" Screams erupted. The girl cried. The accomplice tried to run to the kitchen, but was intercepted by the officers, who broke down the door with a battering ram. "No, please, it's not my fault," Lucia screamed, curling up on the floor, her hands covering her head as if expecting blows. "Calm down, baby. You're safe now," said a female officer, kneeling beside her to calm her down. wrapping her in a thermal blanket from the emergency kit. Roberto, furious, tried to resist, throwing a punch at Torres that missed by inches, but he was quickly subdued with an arm lock and handcuffed to the floor, his face pressed against the dirty linoleum. "That's my daughter. You have no right to barge in like this," he growled, spitting as he struggled against the cold handcuffs digging into his wrists. "You are under arrest for sexual exploitation of minors, pimping, human trafficking, and child abuse," Torres said in a firm, professional voice, reading his rights as the other officers searched the apartment. They found the third girl, 12-year-old Camilla, locked in a small room with bars on the window, shivering under a thin blanket. The apartment was full of evidence: prepaid phones with dating apps open, lists of clients with names and payments recorded in a notebook hidden in a false drawer, explicit photos of the girls on an old laptop, and sedative drugs in the bathroom that they used to keep them docile during the encounters. Roberto Guzman was arrested that night, his cries of protest drowned out by the sound of sirens as he was taken away in a patrol car. The woman, his recent partner, was also arrested as an accomplice. Valentina, Lucia, and Camilla were rescued and taken to a child protection center, where they received immediate medical and psychological care.